title says it all. I don't care what the doctors, teachers, police, my parents, or anyone else in this backward-ass town says. There's no such thing as spontaneous human malnutrition. You probably haven't even heard of it. Well, no, of course you haven't heard of it. It's not fucking real. Spontaneous human malnutrition. SHM. Those 3 letters didn't just ruin my last year of middle school. They've ruined my damn life. It's like every adult in town has gone mad. People don't just... They don't... Fuckity fuck sticks. How do I even begin? It started during the COVID lockdowns. It wasn't until the 5th or 6th case that the local news started putting the pieces together. That's 3 weeks after Grant and I started our investigation. BT dubs. We knew something was up from the 3rd victim. Why? Because the 3rd victim was our friend Doug's mom. Doug is, or was, the 3rd member of our cafeteria loser musketeers setup. When his mom, when whatever SHM actually is, happened to her, she was in the background of our weekly D&D Zoom session. Doug was shaking dice and praying to the nerd gods for a critical, when a weird noise came from his audio. It was barely half a second long, almost too quick to notice, but it was loud. Like, real fucking loud. So loud that Doug jumped a few inches in his seat and dropped the dice. Grant and I never found out if Doug hit that critical. His blonde bowl cut whipped away from the screen before we heard the clattering of dice on polished wood. Me and Grant didn't really care too much about killing cave trolls anymore, though. Both of us were glued to the scene playing out in Doug's kitchen. The noise had come from Doug's mom. She'd stumbled into shot clutching the kitchen sink. She was vibrating. Not trembling, not shaking. Vibrating. The motion didn't seem to be coming from any of her muscles. It was rapid jolting, like that caused by pneumatic tools rather than fits and convulsions. She'd fallen to the floor by the time Doug reached her, totally rigid and still juddering so fast that her form on my screen was barely more than a blur. From the angle, I couldn't see too much of what was going on. I saw Doug reach down to touch her. I heard him yelp in pain, and I started yelling along with him. When he recoiled and held up the stumps where his fingers had been, my speakers screeched at the moment he made contact. A horrible, shrill grinding with a wet edge. The exact same noise Freddy Gruber's elbow made when he accidentally leaned on a power sander in wood shop back in 6th grade. Doug had no color left in his face. He wasn't aware of Grant and I yelling to him through our webcams either. His mom's ankles were still vibrating, the pace now so rapid that a cloud of sawdust started billowing from the floorboards beneath her. We were all screaming. Grant and I in terror, Doug from terror and blinding agony. Before any of us could find the scrap of calm needed to dial 911, Doug's mom let out a violent spasm. Then, with no warning, she fell still. The last frames of the Zoom call were Doug standing over his mom's still and smoking body, pleading with her to wake up. I liked Doug's mom. She was like an aunt to me. I'm glad I didn't have to see any more of her post-SHM than those thin, nearly fleshless ankles. I hadn't seen what SHM did to a person in full yet. I wouldn't have to wait long. Within a week, it'd be on the front page of both the local Tribute and Herald. At the time, though, all I could do was sit in lockdown isolation, robbing myself of sleep for days trying to make any kind of sense of what the hell I'd just seen. That was my first brush with SHM. We were locked down, so I couldn't get to Doug. By the time COVID quarantines finished, he'd been sent off to some institution. That's how Grant and I knew we had to keep our mouths shut. Doug didn't, you see. He was very vocal about what he saw, and even more vocal about how spontaneous human malnutrition was a load of bullshit. Doug knew he was being lied to, and so did we. We didn't have the anger of losing our fucking mom to drive us, though. I think that's why Doug took a different approach. He didn't think sleuthing would get him anywhere. Answers needed to be taken, not found, he'd said. We tried to stop him, but once he got the idea to set fire to a police station in his head, there was no getting it out. Yeah, 2020 was definitely one of those years for me. Anyway, as I said, Doug's mom was the third victim, and it wasn't until the 5th or 6th that the media started connecting dots. There was nothing about the vibrating, of course. That seemed to be being kept deliberately under wraps. What led local newscasters to connect the occurrences was the apparent containment within our town and the... how shall I put this? Unique state the victims are found in. It's from the victims that the SHM lie was created. You won't find any info on it. I know this because I'm not stupid. One of the first things I did when the disappearances started was liaise with my out-of-town contacts. The only SHM info online is on the web pages of local schools, hospitals, community centers, etc. Try and access any of these from an IP outside of the county? 404, my friends. Try and get around that with a VPN? SWAT time. Only took 2 reports of that in our paranormal investigation Discord for Grant and me to realize we were completely fucking alone. Everyone wants to help until helping means an armed unit at the door. But what is the SHM lie? The clue is in the name. Spontaneous because it happens suddenly and without prior warning. There's no rhyme or reason to who gets picked or when. Oldest victim was in their 80s. Youngest was young enough that there are too many first graders around here familiar with funerals. Some go in their sleep. Others, like Doug's mom, when they're humdrumming through their daily grind. There's no sign it's coming either. Well, that we knew of, at least. It wasn't like any of the victims were around to recount what they'd experienced in the lead-up. Whatever happens, it happens suddenly. Nobody could report feeling unwell prior to getting SHM'd. They're fine 1 second, buzzing so hard they're dangerous to touch the next. The human part is obvious. It's the M in SHM, the malnutrition. That's the biggest part of the lie. A local doctor coined the term based on the state victims were left in after the deadly superconvulsions. No matter their size beforehand, every SHM victim came out the other end looking, well, malnourished. Extremely malnourished. The kind of malnourished that the term 0% body fat was made for. They showed a couple of photos on the news and in the papers, like I said. Pictures that all came with a disclaimer that sensitive viewers would find them distressing. Apparently, we are all sensitive viewers when it comes to SHM. even the local news anchors. It's a shame, actually, that the internet blacklisting means the clip of 76 News host Chip Dallas bursting into tears live on air won't make it to YouTube. Despite the grim context, it's still pretty funny to see such a corny POS lose their shit so bad. We didn't think it was funny at the time, though. It took a few days of emotional distance before we found enough teenage edginess to force a laugh at his blubbering. Mainly because it meant we both had to lie about the fact that we'd been crying too. It's the eyes that do it. Nothing prepares you for them, even in a photograph. When you hear about something called spontaneous human malnutrition, you expect to see rib cages, bones, and joints sticking out at odd angles, draped in a sheet-thin layer of near-translucent skin that leaves nothing of the anatomy within to imagination. As harrowing as seeing those peeled-back lips, teeth sticking up, jagged and crooked from shriveled gums, can be, you're not blindsided by them. The sight of their distended bellies is haunting, sure, but if you've ever seen what normal malnutrition looks like, then you're not in unfamiliar territory. The severity of it will take you back, no doubt. Being able to see every crease and fold of a person's lower intestine is jarring, even if you're given a heads up after all. Despite your shock, though, these things won't create any kind of cognitive dissonance for you. They're about on par with what your brain will conjure when you read the phrase, "died of starvation." The eyes, though. No amount of disclaimers or trigger warnings could prep you enough for the eyes. First thing off was the look of the face surrounding them. Every single SHM victim I've seen had the same expression. Terror. Complete and utter terror. All of them died screaming. The eyeballs themselves are far, far worse, though. Wide and unnatural. No disease can do that, and I know because Grant and I researched it for weeks. It doesn't matter what color your eyes are before SHM. When you come out of the other end of it, they'll be black. Not black like coal, or ink and shadow. Black like the darkest reaches of deep space. The kind of black that absorbs all light, so nothing twinkles or shimmers in them. You've seen a shark's eyes, right? Imagine them, but 1,000 times darker. That's why everyone watching Chip Dallas's 76 News special on the mysterious new disease that had so far taken 6 people was crying, screaming, or laughing uncontrollably. Not everyone lapped up the disease lie, though. It's a small town, but it's not that small. We've got 2 high schools. Grant and I were far from the only ones who saw spontaneous human malnutrition for the bullshit it was. You know what they say about the truth, though? A lie can hold it down and beat the shit out of it before it even knows it's in a fight. Doug was the first non-believer to get, as we were told, sent away. He tried to burn down a police station, though. When they took him, we weren't at all surprised. It wasn't until Brian Jarrett's quote-unquote suicide that Grant and I realized just how far the mayor/police/government/military/whoever was prepared to go to keep everything covered up. It was 6 months after the first SHM case, so that's about 102 confirmed deaths for context. At the regular nightly vigils, the townsfolk would say nothing with their lips, but everything with their furtive glances and nervous floor fixations. Brian Jarek was a local podcaster. Before SHM, he talked mainly about nature trails in the closest national parks, or shows that were coming through one of the 3 theaters we boasted. As the SHM epidemic unfolded, this all changed. Brian saw through the bullshit too, and he was very vocal about it. He had the balls to ask the questions on his podcast. Grant and I would only whisper to each other in our quiet corner of the cafeteria. If it's a disease, then where's the CDC? Why hasn't this gained international attention? What kind of disease turns your eyes like that? Where does all the body mass they've lost go? How can they vibrate so fast it sands down wood, but they remain physically unscathed? Why hasn't it spread outside the boundaries of our town? Why aren't the death certificates public? How come their clothes look ragged and old by the time they stop moving? Ryan became a firebrand, a preacher voicing the doubts we all shared. The questions so many of us had, but were all too afraid to ask. He'd known they were coming for him, too. You can probably guess the story. Night before his suicide, he abjectly stated that he would under no circumstances commit suicide. When the first guy to point this out on Facebook was reported dead an hour later, the message became pretty clear. After that, pretty much every public doubter and worried citizen kept their mouths shut. Grant and I didn't accept it, though. We couldn't. It wasn't a disease. We didn't know what it was, but we knew that there was no such fucking thing as spontaneous human malnutrition. We were being lied to, and unless we could figure out why, we wouldn't be safe. We both begged our respective parents to move out of town, of course, but you can imagine how that went down. Grant's dad told him to stop being a pussy. Mine sat me down and gave me a lecture on the importance of not running from your problems. Both of them and our moms bought into the SHM lie. So heavy was my sense of helplessness that I cried myself to sleep most nights after that. If it weren't for Grant, the sense of isolation, that feeling of being the only sane one in the nut house, would have broken me. Grant is not me. He's made of tougher stuff. Whereas I retreated into existential despair, Grant decided Brian Jarek's death as a catalyst to get up and get shit done. That's why he was the one that managed to gather the puzzle pieces and put them together. It took him a little while, though. A few months, and several dozen more bodies happened before the morning he arrived at my door with a cardboard box full of laptops. I still remember his expression as clear as day. He was the phrase, "I've done it," personified. But where his wide grin wore the phrase triumphantly, his eyes bore it with guilt, shame, and fear. He made me help him carry the box up to my room to dump the dozen or so old laptops onto my bed. I had to run through every variation of what the fuck that I knew before he spewed a rambling, near-breathless explanation. He'd started with the footage recorded from our D&D session. He'd been planning to keep it a surprise, but he'd been recording them to put together an animated highlight reel for Doug's birthday. I was a little annoyed at the invasion of privacy at first, but more irate that Grant had kept this SHM clue from me. After a brief and admittedly genuine apology, Grant opened up one of the laptops. He pulled a USB drive out of his pocket and plugged it in. When I asked why he hadn't just used my PC if he had the clip on a thumb drive, he muttered something about not wanting to buy me a new monitor. I understood exactly what he meant once he played me the clip. This probably is no shock to any of you, but the 3-minute snippet was of the end of our final D&D session. It was the video of Doug's mom dying. It wasn't raw footage, though. Grant had edited it. Specifically, he'd slowed it down to 1/10 of the original speed. The 3-minute clip represented only about 20 seconds of real-time footage. It was enough. Grant had found all we needed to prove SHM was a hokum made-up bullshit disease to cover up something else happening. Despite what you're thinking, it didn't feel like a victory. I've never felt worse about being proved right. The something else was so far outside the realms of my explanation that trying to understand what I was watching literally gave me a migraine. All I remember thinking when the clip finished was that I'd give anything to wake up in a reality where I'd been wrong. Once more, I was watching Doug standing over his mom in his kitchen. He was moving at super slow speeds, as to be expected. She wasn't. She was still shaking, but it was shaking now, not blur-inducing vibrations. Her speed was still faster than it should have been, but thanks to Grant's editing, we could see what she was actually doing down there. She was writhing, kicking, flexing every joint in her body with jolting spasms that bent them into contortionist-like angles. To my disgust, I realized that what I'd thought was the natural crack and pop of slowed audio was actually the snapping and crunching of bones and cartilage. More than once, she'd twist into a position that showed more than just her ankles. We saw her legs, saw the flesh on them shrink away in a matter of seconds. We'd catch glimpses of her hands, of the skin around her digits vacuum sealing the bones so tightly the fingernails splintered and cracked. Only once did we see her face. It was one time too many. She'd spasmed forward, folding inward without warning until her temples touched her toes. Her eyes were burning. Bright green flames poured from her sockets, the black orbs at their center bubbling and sputtering with intense heat. The skin of her face was pulled so tight that her pulsing veins around her eyes seemed to dance and writhe above the skin. She was screaming too, screaming with such force that the windpipe in her shrinking neck bulged and her wilting tonsils bled. Her jaw was open long past the point that it should have dislocated. That's when I realized what the weird audio spike had been when I'd seen the footage months earlier, when it was live and at normal speed. It was Doug's mom's screams, sped up so fast they sounded like microphone feedback. But the footage slowed down. It was clearly audible. Garbled and distorted, sure, but there was no mistaking the stretched, tinny shrieks cascading from the laptop speaker. It wasn't a scream of fear, but of pain, unrestrained, unreserved agony. It was when Doug started to bend over in super slow motion that my stomach dropped. I remembered his fingers, the power sander sound that reminded me of Freddy Krueger's elbow in 6th grade. With the footage slowed, Doug's attempts to save his mother sounded nothing like a power sander. The moment the tips of his fingers were within 6 or so inches of the top of her head, there was an almighty crack. A booming thunder so loud that the speakers screamed for a few seconds before falling silent. Twin streams of emerald flame leapt from Doug's mom's boiling, hissing eyes the moment the hardware-killing noise hit. The green fire wrapped around Doug's slow-motion fingers. The moment they made contact, the flesh of his digits curled and split, falling away in fluttering shreds that cascaded back towards his mom's black hole eyes. Within a few seconds, there was nothing left but bone, and before long, that too was lost in the bubbling voids. Doug had pulled his hand away quickly, so I knew he didn't lose more than a few fingers. Still, the tension caused by watching him, from our slowed perspective, holding his hand in that acid-like green burning had me grinding my teeth so hard that I lost a filling. The relief I felt when he finally pulled his hand away was short-lived, however. The worst of Grant's discovery was yet to come. That's the moment they arrived. I can't describe them to you because I haven't actually seen them. Neither has Grant. That's the thing, though. You can't. The way you can't see them, though, that I can describe real fucking clear, even though thinking about it too long makes me so queasy that I'd nearly puke. I didn't notice them at first. They started small, 3 clusters of fuzzy darkness hovering at Doug's feet. Within a few frames, though, they were as tall as his knees and wider as he was. In other words, impossible to ignore. The panic riding my breathing grew louder and louder as the 3 beings unfurled. Once materialized at their full height, they were easily 9 feet tall, the very peaks of the conical heads brushing the ceiling of Doug's mom's lofty rustic kitchen. I had the thought that they were the same intense blackness that SHM left the eyes of every single victim. That's when Grant reached forward, paused the video and minimized the window. I stared at the generic desktop wallpaper, my jaw falling open and closed. I sputtered, trying to get words out. All my mouth could find was shrill, nonsensical gibberish. The 3 figures were still there. The pixels of their forms weren't displaying darkness. They were dead. Peered down to look closer. Sure enough, the backlight of the screen was completely gone where the figures stood. The pixels at the edge of the silhouettes, the ones that should have been displaying the clear blues and greens of a rolling hill, flickered and glitched. They cycled through every color visible to the naked eye. It was at this point that Grant started frantically booting up the rest of the laptops. On the screens of every single one were 3 identical clusters of dead pixels outlined by razor-thin spectrums of maddening color. Whatever these things were, capturing their likeness and displaying it digitally was simply too much for man-made electronics. Grant proved this by showing me his phone, which he'd used to film one of the laptops while it played the video. There, on his home screen, were 3 miniature clusters of lightless pixels with conical heads, figures that aligned perfectly with the aforementioned video when he tapped it open with his thumb a few seconds later. I was babbling and shaking by this point. There were more than a few tears. Let's put it that way. Grant wasn't done yet, though. The clip wasn't even finished. The last 20 seconds of the clip were of the 3 figures towering over Doug. They didn't move, but I could tell they must have been doing something behind their shroud of pixel death. I know for 2 reasons. I'll get through the least harrowing of them first, because for the second I need to build myself up a little. The first reason I knew the conical head giants were there for a reason was Doug's mom. She was convulsing more violently than ever. Her spasms were rocketing her from the floor so hard that she seemed almost to be floating toward the three dark masses. Well, perhaps pulled toward them is more appropriate. Pulled by her bubbling, boiling black hole eyes. The green flames had once more leapt from them. This time, though, there were 3 tendrils of fire, and thankfully none of them found Doug. Instead, they snaked their way through the air until they each found a mass of pixel death. The flames disappeared behind their respective voids, and to my growing horror, I realized they were at the exact height one would expect to find in a 9-foot conical head being. A mouth. The arcs of green fire kept Doug's mom and the dead pixel figures connected until almost the very end of the clip. Her convulsions grew more violent and contorting than ever. Her skin rippled as the final ounces of fat, muscle, and mass were sucked into those void-filled orbs to be burned into green flames. Every vein on her face bulged to bursting point. Her mouth twisted into a teeth-baring grimace from which streaks of foam oozed. Doug stood above his mom, still slow motion and oblivious, as the 3 towering beings around him consumed her until she was little more than an abyss-eyed skeleton draped in papery skin. As I said, though, that was the first of the 2 reasons I knew those beings must have been doing something beneath those lifeless pixels. The second one, the one that's kept me up for however many nights have passed since that morning, was much worse. I could hear them, not through the speaker. The speaker was dead, busted. This was made all too apparent by the fact that Doug's mom's electric chair convulsions and screaming from burning eyes had been inaudible since Doug made the mistake of trying to touch her. No, I could hear them in the room, from all around me. Their hollow tones echoed and bounced off every wall. I cried out, whipping around in every direction, adrenaline shooting through every blood vessel. Grant was crying now, crying and mouthing, "Sorry, I'm sorry," over and over like a twisted mantra. It wasn't just the fact that I could hear them which made me throw the laptop out the damn window. It was what I could hear them doing, too. They were laughing. All 3 of them were locked in hysterics. The kind of laughter you imagine a spider makes before it injects a cocoon prey with chemicals that turn them into liquid mulch. Every barked ha screeched through my eardrums, twisting my spine and setting off every nervous tick I never knew I had. I shouted at Grant for about a half an hour once I was satisfied the laptop hadn't survived the fall. He took it like a champ, and when I'd finally calmed down, he showed me the bloodied knuckles he'd obtained when he put his fist through the drywall after watching it the first time. The fear it created was beyond rationality. Hearing that laughter set off something deep within me, a set of emotions long dormant thanks to the comfortable safety of modern life. Once upon a time, human beings needed that mix of aggression and panic. They needed it because if they didn't have it, they'd never be able to fight their way out of the corners the beings that live in shadows could back them into. I know those feelings now, although every single part of me wishes that I didn't. It was after I apologized for losing my cool and Grant began to talk about our options for what to do next. That our phones rang. I felt the little composure I'd managed to build since the laptop went flying ebb away in an instant. There was no number, but instead of caller not recognized or withheld number, the writing on the screen somehow showed two simple, spirit-crushing words. Human phone. I looked up at Grant, tears once more falling down my cheeks. He was in the same state. He nodded at me, and I gulped, resigning myself to whatever happened next. We both looked at each other and clicked the green icon to accept the call. It was a single voice. The syllables sounded not like organic speech, but like someone had stretched and manipulated audio of billions of people screaming until it became coherent language. Again, only 2 words. But they were enough for both Grant and I to get on our bikes and cycle as far away from my house as we possibly could.
Hello, boys.
My folks were the ones who reported us missing. They found us hiding in our shack in the woods, the one we'd naively believed our parents didn't know about. It was when we started to explain why we ran that shit went sideways fast. We'd expect the cops to not believe us. We never thought they'd place us under house arrest and cut both our houses off from the internet. We were both dumbfounded when they confiscated our phones and told us every device we owned was getting taken in for evidence. We were real fucking surprised when one of the cops punched Grant in the face and told us in no uncertain terms that just because we were kids didn't mean we wouldn't get, and I quote, dealt with. When I found out about the bribe money to play dumb, I didn't know what I felt more. Shocked at how much it was, or disgusted that my parents accepted it. They don't believe me, by the way. They're pissed that we tried to leave town at, and again, I quote, but from my dad now. A time when the community needs to come together and not do anything to rock the boat. That was a week ago. I haven't slept since. I also haven't heard from Grant. I've been watching the news, though. 17 more have gone in the last 5 days. 17 more people burned away and consumed by whatever those things are. And our police, at the very least, are in on it. Keeping it covered up. Not just keeping it covered up, allowing it to happen. I know it runs deeper, though. It has to. Why else would those scientists in hazmat suits keep showing up outside my house at night? Why else would a black van be parked across the street morning, noon, and night? Why else would 3 police officers resign, citing a conflict of conscience, and die under mysterious circumstances the night afterward? Whatever's happening in my town, it's big, and it's being kept quiet. Not only kept quiet, it's being allowed to happen. I stole my dad's work phone to post this. I'm hoping that it gets out there. I'm hoping it makes past the blacklist they've got in place. That's part of the reason I've omitted the name of where I actually live. They'll no doubt have scrappers mining every search engine for it. I mean, fuck, it probably won't work, but I'm plumb out of ideas, and honestly, way beyond desperate by this point. This isn't a send help now post, because the help is half the fucking problem. This is so you can be on the alert. If you get wind of anything that sounds even remotely like SHM, skip town. Leave. Especially if you live in a pokey little cult-like quiet town like mine. I don't care what you think of your neighbors. Forget everything you know about your friends, your family. When shit hits the fan, they will play along with the lie. As I said, this doesn't seem to have spread beyond the town limits so far. Whatever those beings are, they've picked here as their hunting ground. They could move, though, or there could be more of them. Who knows how many ghost towns and dwindling populations are actually whole communities being deliberately fed to these things. The US is a big place. You really think anyone would notice if Podunkville and Shit Heap County vanished slowly over a few years? That's what's happening here, and nobody around is trying to stop it. My parents, the news, the police, the mayor, everyone with any kind of authority are doing what they can to make sure we sit tight and let it happen. There's no such thing as spontaneous human malnutrition. There never has been, and there never will be. But because the idiots around me refuse to stop insisting otherwise, I'm going to get consumed by... No. Fuck it. Fuck the house arrest. I can't stay here. Those things know who I am. Know where I am. They'll be coming for me sooner or later. House arrest be damned. I've got nowhere to go, but Jesus Christ, that footage. Dying alone and starving in the forest would be much better than that. Dad, if you're hearing this, I'm sorry. I don't want to know what it feels like to have eyes that burn like dying suns. I'm not going out the way Doug's mom did, the way I know you're hiding from me that Grant has already done. I can't take this madness anymore, Dad. You know I'm right about all this. I am sorry. I truly am. But you and I both need to accept that it's not my fault you decided to fall down this rabbit hole. As for the rest of you, wish me luck. I just might be cycling through your town one day. Who knows? I'm posting this, then hitting the road. It's about an hour's journey between my house and the edge of town. If I push it, I can make it before my dad or the cops realize what I've done. I'm taking a risk by posting this, I know. But that's the thing. There's always a chance those things might reach me first. They've already proved they can mess with our phones. It wouldn't be a stretch if they were watching me right now. Or even here, in this... No, can't think like that. Gotta focus. Gotta remember that. As risky as leaving is, the risk of staying is always higher. It's a certainty. I'm going to be keeping my head down, so you won't hear from me again. But keep your fingers crossed. Please. Oh, and remember, if and when your local Chip Dallas facsimile starts telling you not to worry about a mysterious new disease called spontaneous human malnutrition, don't believe a word of it. Doesn't exist. and you have every reason to panic. The knock on the van window might as well have come from outer space. Pitch black, parked up on the side of a country road, and in a metal box being pummeled by a storm that had left half the county underwater. My wife and I practically jumped out of our skins at the rat-tat-tat on the driver's side window. I could see nothing except rivulets of water pouring down the window, and the sudden idea of someone leering at us on the other side made me deeply uncomfortable. I hesitated for a moment before I wound the window down. Couldn't help but think of hook-handed men and lonely couples stuck in the middle of nowhere. But when I heard the muffled sound of someone trying to talk to us, I swallowed the worst of my nerves and pressed the button to wind the window down. "Wouldn't stay here." The old man shoved his whole head through the window so he could be heard over the storm. I couldn't help but cringe backwards, and I was reminded of being in a safari with the window down, the way the wild beast come pushing in looking for food. Thankfully, my wife, Leslie, managed to stammer out a reply before any awkward silence could fester. Pardon?" "Can't stay here," he repeated. "This lane'll be underwater by midnight." "Oh," I replied. "Fuck." I was feeling fairly deflated by this point. I hadn't pulled up in the middle of nowhere to sleep in a van because it was my first choice. We'd arrived here only after spending a good 6 hours trying hotel after hotel, only to find they were either underwater or booked to the gills with people escaping the floods. "Do you know anywhere we could go?" Leslie asked. "We just need somewhere to park up." The old man grimaced and shook his head. "Not around my land. Sorry. Ain't falling for that again." He looked in the back as he said this, as if to gauge who we were. It might have been the bong, or my friends Ryan and Meg lying stoned in a sleeping bag, but something back there amused him. He let out a nasty little snort laugh. "No way. Ain't having squatters again. Best bet would be the Weeping Ram," he added. "The what?" "Hotel. About a half hour up the road." "What was it called?" Leslie asked. "The Weeping Ram?" She immediately began typing on her phone, but the old man gestured with his hand for her to stop. "Won't find it online, love," he said. "Look, you go straight and take the third right." Leslie, diligent as ever, took meticulous notes as he spoke, but I had to fight not to roll my eyes. Something about the old man had rubbed me the wrong way. When once he'd left, I said as much. "Half tempted to just stay here," I said as I played with the keys in the ignition. "He probably just wants us out of the area, unhappy with the undesirables lurking so close to his land." "Yeah, but if it floods, we're in real trouble." Ryan appeared out of the back, red-eyed and tired, but clearly having paid more attention than I thought. "Please don't sink my van. It's literally my only possession in life." "He's right," Leslie added. "We can't risk getting caught in the flood." "What's this place meant to be like then?" I asked. Don't know," Leslie shrugged. "I can't find anything about it online." "Quaint as fuck," Ryan said with an easygoing nod of the head. "Old world offline vibes. Like some ancient B&B or something?" "Fucking creepy is what it is," I replied. "Nothing about it online?" Leslie, still scrolling, shook her head. "Better hope we don't end up starring in the West Country Chainsaw Massacre," I grumbled. Nobody laughed. So, with a bit of a grimace, I turned the keys and began to pull the van out of the banking I'd parked on. Leslie smiled and gave my leg a reassuring squeeze before feeding me the first of many directions to come. "Oh, at least we know it has vacancies," I said as I rolled the van to a stop on an empty gravel lot. "Is that a thatch roof?" Leslie cried while ignoring me. "Oh my God, it is!" Meg cooed, her blonde hair and round face making a brief appearance by the front seats. "Let's get in there and take a look." She quickly disappeared back into the rear of the van where her and Ryan set about gathering their things. "Oh, come on, Mark. It is quaint," Leslie said. I couldn't help but grimace. This funny-looking pub we'd been sent to by some stranger was in the middle of fucking nowhere, situated in a small valley between two stony hills, with a view overlooking an overgrown field below. The land might once have been used for farming, if only for grazing animals, but now it looked desolate and dingy. Rain-lashed thorns and thistles and spiky thickets of grass were just about the only thing we'd seen in our headlights on the way up. And sure, the weeping ram was somewhat quaint with its expensive thatch roof and a hand-painted sign of a pained-looking sheep that swung fitfully in the wind. Its lumpen white plaster facade adding to the medieval rustic vibe, but I got the feeling the place was going to be full of cobwebs, spiders, dust, and miserable old locals with no sense of humor. And where the hell were we? The stormy night had eaten the road behind us, erasing all sense of time and place as we drove down a muddy gravel lane, until out of nowhere the turning the old man had warned us about appeared and led us to the pub. With the rest of the county running in circles because of the storm, I couldn't shake the feeling we'd crawled into a forgotten corner of the world. One best left alone. Did people really come here to get drunk or stay for the night? Did people drive here to come to work, or to eat, cook, and serve drinks? It wasn't just out of place with the internet age. It seemed out of place with civilization itself. My suspicions were confirmed once inside. There was barely enough room for the four of us to cram into the small, poorly lit corridor, so Ryan peeked ahead and found the main drinking hall off to the right. Passing through, our feet scuffed an ancient stone floor, and I noted the horsehair plaster on the walls that likely predated the First World War. It reeked of mildew and damp, and yet the air seemed dry and musty at the same time. There were only 4 tables and 2 booths for drinkers, and a dark hardwood bar that some potato-faced man likely served booze from. But for now, it was all deserted. No patrons, no bartender. The only sign of life was the faint flicker of light from the candlelight sconces. "Oh my God, this is crazy!" Meg cried, grabbing Leslie's arm to draw her attention to the light fittings. "Look at that!" Leslie agreed enthusiastically, but I tuned it out as I walked up to the bar and ran a finger across its greasy grain. And it was dusty as hell, like it had gone unused for years. Behind the counter were a few racks for spirits, a couple of taps, and a single door that led to some unlit space. Could have been a kitchen or a storeroom. Had no way of knowing, but I stared into the darkness and felt an uncomfortable sensation gather in my stomach. It looked like something was moving back there. But why would someone be lurking in the dark? "Do you think the owner's back there?" I didn't hear Leslie approach, so I couldn't hide my fear when she spoke, jumping like some spooked child. She made no mention of my overreaction, not even a chuckle, and for some reason that bothered me more than if she'd teased me about it. "Let's see," I said, and went behind the bar and into the darkness. Using my phone as a flashlight, I scanned the room, seeing a dusty old kitchen with pots and pans that hadn't been used for years. Left to right, and left again. I looked carefully for some sign of life. I was sure I'd seen someone moving around. I stepped deeper into the kitchen, and when my light caught the leering grin of an old woman, it took all my resolve not to cry out. Without meaning to, I dropped my phone and went to pick it up while stammering out the best greeting I could, given the circumstances. Excuse me, I cried, unable to shake the image of the strange-looking face I'd just glimpsed in a dark room. Sorry, I didn't mean to intrude or anything. It's just we were directed here by... The words stopped dead in my mouth when I stood up and brought the light up. There she was again. That old woman. Eerie grin and wide eyes. Pallid white skin. Hands held together in front of her like an elderly headmistress supervising some exam. And she hadn't moved since I'd last laid the torch on her. Not an inch. Not a millimeter, even. There was no motion to her, no breath, no reaction. Not even the constant darting micro-movements of the human eye that are barely perceptible, but always there. Somewhere my mind told me this must be a mannequin, not a person. Too uncanny, not right. And yet it couldn't be. She was so lifelike. I couldn't help but take a few steps towards her, noticing faint downy hair along her cheek, liver spots by her hairline, and 1,000 other details I refused to believe were the product of some crazy artist working with wax. But her eyes did not even dilate when the torch glinted directly off their glassy surface. No human could stand in darkness and have a torch beamed directly into their eyeballs and not even flinch. It just wasn't possible. Holy shit, I muttered before realizing I had to show the others this incredible find. Slowly, I backed out of the room, not yet willing to turn my back to that creepy thing, and found the others admiring the old wood-burning fireplace in the corner of the room. Any luck back there? Leslie asked when she saw me. Jesus Christ, guys, I cried breathlessly. You won't believe— Oh no! Just look at you poor things! I was interrupted by the urgent cry of a brittle feminine voice. The old woman appeared behind us as if out of nowhere, and my stomach hit the floor. With a warm smile and gentle grandmotherly tone, she swept past me and towards my friends, where she immediately began cooing over them. Oh, you're drenched! Look at you! How on earth did you make it up here in this weather? You must be freezing! And hungry too! The others reacted normally, as anyone might when greeted by a friendly old landlady. But I stood rooted to the spot, not sure if what I was seeing was even real. Her clothes were identical to the thing in that room, as was her hair and face. Everything was the same, except for that deeply unsettling expression. That ever so slightly too wide grin that had terrified me just seconds before in the dark was gone, replaced with a surprised but welcoming smile. While everyone was busy being fawned over, I quickly backtracked into the kitchen and shone my light at the corner. It was empty. Mark! Leslie called and I went back into the lounge. Mark, come on, this is Bernadette. She's going to show us to our rooms. We're not strictly open for business, the old woman said with what seemed to me to be not quite sincere concern. But I cannot possibly turn anyone away in weather like this. She smiled at Leslie, and then at me. And for the briefest of moments, hidden in the fractions of a second where Leslie wasn't looking, the old woman winked at me. Leslie asked me what was wrong, and I wasn't sure how to answer. Right there and then, sat on our bed where it was warm and safe, just the two of us. There wasn't much, if anything, wrong at all. It felt all too easy to ignore the strangeness I'd just experienced. So, that's what I did. I shrugged it off, told Leslie that everything was okay, and settled into bed beside her. But not before locking our door. After that, I crawled under the covers, pulled my wife close and shut my eyes. Sleep came surprisingly quick, although there were a few flashing images of a deathly white face haunting me in my dreams. I couldn't say what woke me. I came to with the faint impression of a loud noise just outside the room, subtly aware of a cold breeze on my right side where Leslie should have been. Now she was gone, the covers thrown back and the bed beside me empty. Disoriented, I pulled myself upright and immediately went stumbling to the door looking for her. Arms wrapped around my bare chest to stay warm, I poked my head out into the corridor and saw nothing except darkness. Again, that subtle, almost subconscious idea of movement in the inky black. Leslie? I called out and waited, straining to hear something, anything, over the roaring rain against the pub's ancient walls. Something might have moved around in response, but I wasn't sure. It was like listening for voices and white noise. The brain can play tricks on you. Nervous and wishing that I could just crawl back into bed and pretend that nothing was wrong, I went back into the room to get dressed and turn the light on. When I returned to the corridor, with the help of my room light, I could now see the doors of other guest rooms stretching down the hallway before fading into darkness. And there, at the very threshold of the light, was someone's phone. The screen broken and the edges dented. I picked it up and could tell from the astrological stickers on the back it belonged to Meg. The door to her and Ryan's room was empty, and looking inside I saw that the bed was ruffled and unmade, and Ryan's phone was still plugged into a power back near the mattress. But where were they? And why was there only one of his trainers lying upside down, halfway between the bed and the door? It was like he'd been trying to pull his shoes on when something interrupted him. What the fuck? I muttered quietly as I panned my torch across the room. God, I wanted this weird little nightmare to be over with. Ever since I'd seen that terrifying old woman standing in the corner of that kitchen, frozen in place like some lifelike wax dummy, I'd felt as if I'd walked right into the Twilight Zone. But I didn't know how to go about it. All I could think of was to go back out in the corridor and try crying out for Leslie. Les, come on! Where are you? This time there was a definite sound. A muffled but clearly audible thump that came from one of the doors off further down the hallway. It sounded like it had come near the stairs, and that made sense. If the others were moving around, they weren't going to stick around in the empty guest portion of the house. Just empty doors and creaking floorboards. No. They'd probably go downstairs to find the old woman. I paused at the top of the stairwell and waited, listening for some confirmation that the others were safe and sound. I hoped I might hear them laughing and chatting, maybe sharing a drink. Guys? Another thump. This time it definitely came from below. Quietly tiptoeing like some scared child, I slunk down the hardwood stairs, pressing my feet to the edges of each step where I knew the wood would be strongest and least likely to make noise. Down one floor, and down another. The sound of something moving deep within the building drew me on further into what felt like a nightmare, but I couldn't just turn back. A part of me remained convinced that any second, reality and common sense would reassert themselves, that everything would snap back into place where it was meant to be. I'd find the others laughing and enjoying a drink. Maybe the girls had gone off for a chat and Ryan followed. And now I would do the same. Maybe there'd been a medical emergency. Meg might have fallen and the others were attending to her. Anything that might explain why I'd woken up alone, crying out only for no one to reply. A lifetime of experience had taught me that childish fears went away when you shone a light at them. But then again, I had never experienced anything like that woman standing in the darkness. On the ground floor, just as the tight spiral staircase opened out onto another hallway, I spotted a gentle amber glow. It came from an open door some way down the corridor. I was drawn to the first sign of life I'd seen since waking up, and pushed the door open, hoping to find my friends gathered around a fire. Instead, I found something out of a surreal nightmare. Dogs, cats, foxes, rabbits. 40, maybe 50 animals lined the walls and shelves. Stiff cotton-stuffed faces and glassy eyes glaring at me from every nook and cranny of a cramped, humid room. Of course, in the country, it isn't uncommon to come across something like this. We'd stayed in a hotel in Scotland just a few weeks before with an enormous deer head mounted over the bed. But this room wasn't some big, showy affectation. It felt private, like someone actually came to that place and sat on the single empty chair, looking for comfort. And no one would have ever been proud of bagging these animals. No majestic deer or threatening bears. Instead, these animals were all of the sad and small variety. There was a Dalmatian in one corner, its head slightly misshapen, a weasel missing 2 legs on a cabinet, a badger with no head, and enough rabbits to make a warren, all of them riddled with myxomatosis that left them ugly and deformed. This was not some grand display of nature's majesty. It was, at best, the showcase of an amateur taxidermist who'd scavenged motorways for his subjects. So, where was the amateur taxidermist? And where are my friends? Hello? I had to force the lone word out of my mouth. Again, I was looking for that sense of reality and normality. I wanted to dispel the childish fear that was gripping me tighter and tighter with each passing second. Sure, things were weird, but so what? Something moved. My heart seized as my eyes darted left and right, desperately trying to make sense of what my mind insisted could not have actually happened. The room was well lit, but so full of dusty fur and old furniture it was impossible to say. Too many shadow-lined shelves, too much space to keep track of. Was I sure anything moved at all? I took a step further into the room and tried to make sense of it all. If I had seen something move, where? My gut told me the movement had come from the corner with the Dalmatian. I took a closer look at it. I love dogs. I love them dearly. But I didn't love that one. For a start, it was dead. Whoever had set out to remake it might have had good intentions, but come on. You can't stuff Fido full of sawdust and call it anything other than a pile of dog-shaped sawdust. Draping the poor animal's skin over it does nothing for me except to make my skin crawl. And that goes for good taxidermy, the kind you might find on display in some eccentric's house. But this Dalmatian was all out of shape. Its abdomen bulged irregularly, its eyes pointed in different directions, and its glossy open mouth didn't bear the welcoming smile of a friendly canine, but instead the slack open jaw expression of some malicious idiot. The sound I'd been following returned, this time closer than ever before. It sounded like it had been just outside the hallway. I went and checked, staying close to the doorway where there was at least sufficient light. There seemed to be nothing. But when I turned back to the room of animals, I felt a terrible, overwhelming sensation of wrongness. The Dalmatian was gone. In the dark, something brushed against my leg, and I heard the telltale click-clack of a dog's claws on hardwood floor. Spinning on the spot, I tried to follow it, but caught only the faintest hint of a white and black animal fading into the darkness of the corridor. As I followed, my torch illuminated only 3 steps of the basement stairs. Looking up from the very bottom was the Dalmatian, with its strange lumpen head. The rest of it remained in shadow. It waited patiently. It did not bark or pant like any normal dog. It stared expectantly, and so far I had followed it only out of some naive hope that it might lead me to my friends. But as time had gone on, as the evening had taken on more and more of that surreal, almost dreamlike quality that made me feel helpless and trapped, I could not escape the feeling that the dog was leading me deeper into the nightmare and not out of it. This was not helped by the fact that as I'd followed it onwards into the strange hotel, passing old rooms full of rotting knickknacks and cobweb-covered doors, the strange thumping noise had grown louder and louder. There were times that it occurred to me to turn and leave, to get into the van and just go. Maybe I would leave if I'd been in a more normal state of mind, but I like to think that I would never abandon my wife or my friends. I may have been afraid, but I wasn't a coward. Leslie! Again, I hoped that she would suddenly appear. The lights would come on. The ever-present dread would be pushed back, but there was nothing. I stood at the threshold of the basement stairs and knew, sooner or later, I'd have to follow the dog. Down in the dark, someone groaned, and it made me realize I could wait no more. A woman was down there, and I was certain it was Leslie who'd made it. As if on cue, the dog disappeared, like it knew I was going to follow now. I descended and found myself in a crowded, dusty basement full of garbage and soggy boxes. The roof leaked in 6 places, and with the storm in full effect, the ground had flooded by about 6 inches so that my feet were completely submerged in filthy-looking water. Somewhere in the basement, I could hear the dog's paws cut through the water in a lazy, sloshing canter. I was looking around the basement with my phone as a torch, trying to see where it was leading me, when something caught my eye. A stony cylindrical structure in one far corner. It was an old well, common enough in a house of the era, but in an unusual touch it had been sealed shut with a heavy wooden lid. Something about that enormous slab of blackened timber seemed odd to me. It wasn't merely a safety feature. It looked like the sort of thing you'd seal a tomb with. Behind me came another splash. This was different to the quiet patter of the dog. It was like something or someone dropping into the water. I turned towards the sound and saw Bernadette, her face twisted into another hideous grin, eyes wide and excited. I let out a cry and stumbled backwards, falling. But by the time I managed to get back on my feet, the old woman was gone. Close to panic, I swept my light around me and found her. She had moved and was close to my back, but she was frozen again, unreactive, like another piece of taxidermy. I wanted to run away at the sight of her standing so close, but somehow I just knew if I took my torch away again, she'd disappear, and I might not have time to find her before her bony fingers found me in the dark. Instead, I stayed in one place and slowly backed away. "Mark?" The sound of Leslie's voice hit me like a freight train. I gasped, turned instinctively towards her, and then back again to find that Bernadette had already disappeared, aware that she might be anywhere. I focused on my wife, finding myself overcome with emotion, both good and bad, as my eyes took in the strange state of her. She looked pale, disoriented, and afraid. She stood there in a t-shirt and underwear, freezing cold, looking almost sickly. But at least she was there, At least she was right in front of me. At last, some element of this nightmare was giving way. "Jesus Christ, babes, what happened?" I said as I wrapped my arms around her. "I don't know," she mewed like a sick child. "I had these nightmares and I woke up here. I think I was sleepwalking. I dreamt I was a little boy speaking to something in a well. I had a sister, I had a dog. The voice in the well wanted me to... God, it made me do such strange things." I couldn't help but look at the well in the corner. Her eyes followed mine and she grimaced. "I don't like this place. Can we go? It feels... God, it feels so weird here. Am I still dreaming?" She walked forward and practically fell into my arms. With one arm wrapped around her, I held her upright and led her towards the stairs. Part of me wanted to ask about Meg and Ryan, but I knew it was more important to get her somewhere safe. We had climbed just a few stairs when I heard the sudden sound of someone barreling towards us at a sprint, their feet splashing in the water with stomach-churning speed. I turned just in time to see the old woman's face, still twisted, coming out of the dark. Instinctively, I pushed Leslie ahead of me, but Bernadette was more interested in me. With an icy hard grip, she grabbed my ankle and yanked me down. My head hit one of the steps, and for a brief moment, everything went a little wobbly. The next thing I was aware of was water rising to my ears, and the sight of the basement steps receding away. Something was pulling me deeper into the dark. I tried to struggle, but a hard, rubbery hand refused to let go of my ankle. I kicked hard with the other leg, hitting Bernadette in the small of her back. To my disgust, my foot hit something like densely packed hay, or maybe even wood. It certainly wasn't flesh. Slowly, Bernadette turned to face me, her head pivoting like an owl's while her body kept facing the other way. "My brother will look after you," she said. "He has a gift for putting people back together after they've fallen apart. Always had, even as a little boy. You don't realize just how hurt you are. None of you do. But that's okay. My brother is good at putting things back together." Still facing me, eyes wide and manic, she pulled me towards what I slowly realized was the well in the far corner of the basement. "He scrapes away the scars and wounds and replaces the broken bones and withered muscles with fresh, clean, perfumed sawdust. Puts you back together one bit at a time. Did you know how hurt you were? Did you see the cuts and scars across your faces and hands? I did." She stopped at the well. With one arm and freakish strength, she effortlessly lifted the wooden slab. And so did he. Even in the dark, he could see the bleeding, inside and out, full of it, full of blood. You're all so full of blood. You needed help, just like me. The smell that came out of that pit was nauseating, and realizing what was about to happen, I started to kick and punch, grabbing at any part of the old woman I could while trying my best to hurt her. But all that came away beneath my nails was papery skin and moldy sawdust that smelled of rotten meat. Bernadette climbed up onto the lip of the well and swung me over the darkness. I couldn't help but look down into the inky abyss, where I caught sight of what looked like an oil leak on asphalt, a dark, murky collection of metallic colors, some of which I couldn't possibly describe in words. Slowly, something strange bobbed up from the foul fluid. A hand, gnarled and foul, began to break the surface and reach towards me. Just as I felt like my sanity was going to shatter into 1,000 pieces, I was thrown sideways into the water. There was a grunt and a struggle, and I looked up to see Leslie. her eyes clear for the first time since I found her, repeatedly hitting the old woman with a bit of wood. She was furious and unrelenting as she whacked Bernadette over and over. She had saved me, and for a moment I fell in love with her all over again. But the romance didn't last long before my senses returned and I realized I couldn't just lie there. Desperate to help, I pulled myself to my feet and rushed over, just in time as well. Leslie went for one final swing and Bernadette caught the plank of wood with an unflinching hand. Slowly, she tightened her grip and the wood began to splinter. But with all of her attention on my wife, she failed to notice me charging towards her. With a good shove, I pushed her off the edge of the well and into the darkness below. We heard a thick, syrupy plop, and when we looked over, we saw her struggling in the filth below. Two eyes fixed us in the dark from a soot-covered face, and I knew we couldn't waste another second. I grabbed Leslie's elbow and ran. "Let's get the fuck out of here," I cried as we scampered up the stairs. Behind us, Bernadette let out a blood-curdling howl. A few hours later, when the sun was beginning to rise, we had pulled the van up on the right side of the road to take a moment to ourselves and go over the strange events of the night before. The storm, starting to fade by now, had made a terrible mess of the roads, and it had taken us an infuriating few hours just to find another main road, as so many of the county lanes were blocked by fallen trees and branches. But now, with traffic passing us by and electric lights visible in the distance, we had finally found ourselves on the trail of civilization. "Jesus fuck," I said as the engine died and silence settled over both of us. "Did that actually happen?" Leslie simply shook her head. "It was a dream, right? The whole thing. I remember sleeping and someone coming to me and..." "I was definitely awake for my part of it," I replied. "I woke up in the middle of the night and you were missing, so I went looking. None of that was in my head. It felt surreal and all kinds of wrong, but it wasn't a product of my mind." "It's hard for me to separate things. When I look back, one moment I'm a little boy scraping squirrels off the side of the road. The next I'm me in a basement. That terrible old woman stroking my cheek." I put my arm around her and pulled her close. "Where are the others?" she asked after a few moments. "I don't know," I replied while shaking my head. "God, Mark, we need to find them. Even if we just call the police and tell them where, we need to. We need to do something." "Do you have your phone?" I asked. "We can call them." "No. Do you?" "I lost it in that basement." I turned in my seat to look in the back where I'd hoped I'd find a spare phone or a laptop, something I could use to get help. But I froze in place when I saw Meg and Ryan's sleeping bag. It wasn't empty. Meg and Ryan, frozen with waxy skin and glassy eyes, lay side by side in the back of the van, holding hands, posed like cadavers or mannequins in some strange display. Dead, I figured. Surely dead. They had to be. Taken first by Bernadette, hollowed out by whatever lay in the well, and added to the collection. But that was before I saw the gentle murmuring of Meg's bluish lips, and the way her eyes looked at me as I leaned over my seat to try and hear what strange words she was whispering. It wasn't until I was so close I could feel her icy breath and smell the strange chemicals that soaked her that I realized what she was muttering in a feverish terror. "It hurts. It hurts. It hurts. It hurts. It hurts. It hurts." Dr. Chase Lopez stood close to the shoreline, his rubber boots mere inches from where the inky water lapped like tongues at the sand. To me, it looked as if he was teasing it. The ocean reached, but never quite far enough to touch. Dr. Lopez's face was buried in his cell phone.
"Come look at this, Len,"
he said. I hesitated to duck under the yards of yellow caution tape suspended around the beach, preventing locals and tourists from entering these waters. The stench of it was strong enough from where I stood. Dr. Lopez must have been drowning in it. The smell made the air seem heavy, like you were breathing in something solid. It stuck on my tongue, metallic. The ocean reeked of blood. It took me time, but I forced myself to walk closer to the source. Dr. Lopez held out his phone to me, and I had to squint and cup my hands over the screen to see it in the sunlight. The chemical analysis of the water, fresh from our main lab.
"Just came in,"
he said.
"and it's not oil. BP lives to see another day."
Then, what the hell is it?
"We don't know."
Dr. Lopez tucked his phone back into his pocket and looked to the ocean.
"Not yet, at least. I'm waiting for more to come through from Maine. That's just preliminary stuff. What does it smell like to you?"
It smells like blood.
"And it's so dark. Could be mass amounts of squid ink, however impossible that may be."
Chemical analysis would have clocked that.
"Right. Well, not much we can really do but wait."
The ocean that stretched out before us was black. With a telescope on the ground and a helicopter in the sky, we could see that this dark patch existed 75 or so feet out from the shore. It was big, but not exactly oil spill big. When the black tide rolled in a few days ago, dead fish and other sea life began to wash ashore. The weird thing about the dead fish was that they didn't rot. By the time we arrived, they had been roasting on the beach for over 2 days. Yet, none of the expected effects of decomposition were present. They were in suspended animation. Dead, but not looking like it. Not even picked apart by gulls or other scavengers. The birds disappeared when the black tide rolled in. We found several species of fish native to this part of the Pacific, a few jellyfish, and one angel shark in the menagerie. They seemed so alive that, at first, we researchers tried to revive them. I put one orange fish inside a tank and was dismayed to find it floated belly up. There it stayed, never decomposing, for the remainder of our time on the island. On our second day there, Dr. Lopez told me that the lab results were inconclusive. Oh, what the hell does that mean? Can you at least tell me if it has sodium and chloride in it? It was supposed to be a joke, but Dr. Lopez just shook his head at me.
"No, Len. I'm telling you, they don't know. Whatever it's made of, it's not something we've ever seen before. It's not even blood."
I sat down. I'd never gotten such devastating or exciting news. Something new. Something we could put our names on, but where to begin? How could we possibly know its dangers if we couldn't even tell what it was made of? I didn't know what reaction was appropriate to have. It has to be something, Chase. It came from Earth, didn't it? Maybe it's a chemical runoff that some goddamn plastic company shit out into the ocean. An experimental sort of thing.
They didn't detect any polymers. Not a bad guess, though.
What do we do now? Are they running more tests? Dr. Lopez looked around the tiny space. We occupied a local resort room, which was converted to suit our needs as we did our research. The resort's residents were forced to evacuate when the black tide arrived, being fed bullshit reasons about a chemical spill. There were bunk beds that Dr. Lopez and I shared with 2 others, another marine biologist named Carmen, and an environmental engineer named Gabriel. The local military kept the area in a tight lockdown. No word of this would reach the news.
Maybe we dive,
Dr. Lopez suggested. I blanched. Chase, that substance killed those fish. Whatever it is, it's toxic.
We've got diving suits. It's the 21st century and won't touch our skin.
So we got ready to dive. It wasn't my place to refuse an order from my superior, and I knew that being scared was no viable excuse. Carmen agreed to dive with us, but Gabriel would go no further than the shore. He tagged along to watch from a safe distance. We slipped into diving gear and stood at the edge, just an inch from where the black tide sucked in and out. Carmen shrugged her shoulders at it.
Well, I guess I'll go first, if everyone's gonna be a pussy about it.
She walked out into the ocean. I watched her while holding my breath. I expected her to zip beneath the obsidian surface, pulled to her death by some terrible monster. I expected her to scream as the substance ate through her suit, and ultimately her skin. I expected her to collapse and die like the fish did, silently poisoned. None of this happened. Carmen waded out several yards until she could swim, then dived beneath the water. From the radio, she said,
Come on in, folks. The water's warm.
Dr. Lopez and I followed her. The water was warm. As we sank beneath it, we noticed a peculiar phenomenon. The black tide sat on top of the water, never mixing. It was about 20 inches thick. The temperature difference was notable. The water below, the blackness, was freezing, almost as if it had been siphoned of its heat. I reached my hand into it, and it was a jarring sensation to feel such warmth while the rest of me shivered.
A strange sight indeed.
We were staring upward into space. That's what it looked like to me. If I close my eyes, I can go back to that moment. I'm suspended in the cold ocean, staring up at an inky night sky that blocks out the light of the sun. If I stare long enough, I see little pinpricks of starlight glitter throughout it. It's almost beautiful. It is beautiful. I feel compelled to go into it and remain there in its warm embrace, floating in the atmosphere, stars rippling around me. I started to swim upward. Then, a voice.
Get out of the water,
Gabriel commanded. Dr. Lopez caught my arm, and I came to my senses.
What's up, Gabe?
He asked.
Get out now!
We turned and swam toward the shore. The feeling of coming up through the black tide was indescribable, warm and wonderful. My skin exploded into goosebumps as I emerged from it. I wanted to go back. I was tired. I could sleep in that water. Carmen was the last one to emerge, and she walked backward. She knocked into Dr. Lopez and didn't seem to notice.
Jesus H. Christ!
She said,
What the hell?
I saw it. Saw them. A dozen shark fins slowly moving through the black water toward the shoreline. Each shark's fin was different. The tide gently pushed them ashore in a neat little row, heads facing us and tails toward the sea. There were 12 different species of shark. All of them dead.
Fuck.
Dr. Lopez said.
What are the odds?
The sight struck me numb. This felt purposeful, an arrangement made to be seen. A presentation. I couldn't get any closer. The water didn't feel inviting anymore. It felt hostile. Suddenly, I had the urge to look away from it, as if I had met a stranger's eye for too long.
That's an Atlantic sharpnose.
Carmen pointed at one of them.
How the hell is it here, in the Pacific?
What is that one?
Gabriel asked, pointing at another. This shark was not something I'd ever seen before. It was dark pink, almost red. Adorning its head were small horns arranged like a crown.
It can't be,
Dr. Lopez said. He walked to it and crouched down. Despite our protests, he grabbed the dead shark and inspected its head and the inside of its mouth. His fingers tapped along its teeth like he was a dentist, counting each one aloud, sliding his hand along the gills and peering into its eye. He finally stood, and I saw him trembling as he turned to us.
I could be wrong, but this looks like Hibudus.
A what? I asked.
Opportunistic bugger. Really fast. Lived about 100 million years ago, if I remember correctly. It's been extinct since the late Cretaceous period.
None of us believed him. Carmen was the first to call him crazy. I didn't know much about extinct marine life, but I knew this wasn't possible. It might just look like a hibudus, perhaps a mutated something else. We called for help and lugged the sharp nose and the maybe hibudus back to our makeshift lab. Dr. Lopez called a marine archaeologist and a paleontologist. I went to the bathroom and inspected every inch of my skin. That intoxicating warmth was long forgotten. I was utterly disgusted at the thought of having been in that black water. I expected a red rash, weeping abrasions, and infection, but I saw nothing out of the ordinary, just my skin. Something strange happened the next day. Gabriel began talking about the black tide like it was a person.
She did that on purpose.
He said at breakfast.
She wanted us to see those sharks.
Who is she?
Carmen asked. She was busy buttering a slice of bread. I watched her do it and noticed there was a minor cut on her pointer finger. Gabriel seemed irritated.
The black water. That was a message to us.
What kind of a message, Gabe?
Carmen taunted.
That it can resurrect sharks from a gazillion years ago? Give me a fucking break.
She's older than us. Much smarter.
They argued and I left. Dr. Lopez's people came later that afternoon with more equipment and knowledge. They fawned over the shark, spent hours alone in a refrigerated room with it, came out and swore to us it's an extinct species. They began calling more people, bigwigs from huge universities. This tide didn't seem like it was ours anymore. I woke up in the middle of the night to find that Gabriel was missing from his bunk. I couldn't go back to sleep. With rising concern, I surmised he may just be using the bathroom, taking a walk, talking to a loved one in a different time zone. But I knew that wasn't the case, so I rose from bed and went to the window. I saw Gabriel on the shore. He was walking toward the tide. Fear gripped me. It was like watching someone standing atop a skyscraper about to jump. Helpless panic, impending doom. "Chase, Carmen, wake up!" I shouted. "Gabriel's walking toward the fucking water!"
What?
Carmen groaned. Dr. Lopez rolled over to face the wall. I shook him harder, and he finally sat up.
Len, seriously.
Can we please go check on him? I'm worried. I mean, why is he out there at this hour? Dr. Lopez had been my supervisor for 3 years. Before that, he was my professor and personal advisor. He rarely said no to me. He got out of bed and followed me out of the resort and toward the black tide. The moon was full, and the beach was illuminated in pale blue. As we approached, I noticed that the light didn't reflect off the surface of the black water. It was consumed by it, like a void. It had been different in the sun. The rays reflect back at you, almost blinding. Why should the moonlight be different? Gabriel was nowhere to be seen. Dr. Lopez and I ducked beneath the caution tape and walked as far as we were willing to. The black tide was still. If I didn't know any better, I'd have said it was a solid sheet of blackness lying on top of the ocean. Vanta black. Blacker than black. Black hole. I wanted to touch it, to see if it was the same thing we encountered in the daylight or if something else had replaced it. Then Gabriel appeared. He was floating face down in the void, several yards from the shore. Slowly, his body began to move toward us. He looked like he was in space, a place where there are millions of light years between stars and planets, and there's absolutely no light. Just his partially submerged body, suspended in eternity, moving forward with such ease and purpose that there could have been a conveyor belt beneath him. My body felt drained of its blood. I was cold with fright. When I moved toward the water, Dr. Lopez grabbed me.
Don't.
He whispered.
Don't go in there.
Gabriel's body stopped floating toward us. It was frozen in the blackness, like a movie on pause. We stayed where we were, and I felt sick enough to puke. We can't leave him there.
I think.
Dr. Lopez started, then paused. I could hear him swallow.
I think it wants us to go in.
Gabriel's body reanimated and floated backward, away from the shore. I was disgusted with myself for not going after him. What if he's still alive? Not yet drowned? He floated back several more feet, stopped, and then started toward us again. I knew what Dr. Lopez meant now. These aren't the movements of the natural current. These movements are deliberate, teasing, controlled. Gabriel got close enough to the shore that we could touch him. With hubris, I crouched down and reached for his arm. Dr. Lopez jerked me away just as Gabriel zipped backward and slipped beneath the surface, blinked out of existence. TV turned off. We fell into the sand and scrambled away from the water's edge. Hot tears filled my eyes. Dr. Lopez was silent. We waited, unable to move. A few yards out, Gabriel's body appeared again, static in the void. In the daylight, we pulled Gabriel out using lifeguard equipment. He was dead, but he looked alive, asleep. When the paramedics put him on a stretcher, inky liquid spilled from his lips. We all jumped away from it. One paramedic cursed as they started to take him toward the ambulance, where a medical doctor would pronounce him dead at the hospital.
We can't allow this.
Dr. Lopez hissed. He ran after them.
Wait. We must keep the body here. The water may be infected, and it wouldn't be safe to take him to a hospital full of compromised people.
I knew what he was doing because I thought the same thing. I wanted to see if Gabriel's body was going to decompose. Carmen was oddly stoic when I gave her the news about Gabriel. She said something strange that made me uneasy.
He answered her call.
Perhaps she was making fun of him for the previous day's conversation, which seemed cruel even for gruff Carmen. As I sat with her, I noticed the cut on her finger was redder, inflamed. "What's up with your hand?" I asked. She hid it between her thighs.
Paper cut. It's been itchy, so I made it worse.
I wondered if she had that cut when we went diving. Somehow, Dr. Lopez convinced the paramedics to leave Gabriel's body with us. We took him wrapped in a body bag to the refrigerated room where we laid out some sharks and other dead things. He mentioned something about his pockets being lighter now, and I understood. Bribing a paramedic to leave our dead colleague's body here for us to study. Is this what we had come to? It was insanity. But at least Dr. Lopez succeeded in preventing any information leaks to the public. A tech from the main lab called us not long after we stored Gabriel in the room.
Have you noticed the phenomenon evaporating or dissipating at all?
No, it's still there. Nothing has changed as far as we can see.
Weird. All the samples you sent us are gone.
What do you mean, gone?
Well, it's gone. Completely vanished overnight. Now all we have are tubes of plain old Pacific Ocean water. We can't find a trace of the stuff anywhere.
I didn't know what to make of it. Neither did Carmen or Dr. Lopez. For the first time in my career, I felt stupid. More than that, I felt gullible, like I'd been tricked here on a wild goose chase. Paranoia compelled me to go back to the shore and see if the substance was still there. It was. We were stuck, unable to categorize the black tide, unable to make sense of the dead but not decomposing corpses, and unable to find answers. After the accident, it felt wrong to get close to it anyhow. Dr. Lopez didn't want to discuss the events of Gabriel's death with me, yet he had been the one to ascribe malicious intention to the water that night. Told me that it wants us to go in. And I believed him. Still do. Sometime later, Carmen amputated her hand. I found her on the floor in the bathroom, curled into a ball, soaked in blood. So much blood I thought she couldn't possibly have any left in her body. Somewhere in the mess was a hammer she'd used to break her wrist, and the saw that had done most of the deed. However, Carmen underestimated how difficult it would be to amputate a limb by herself. As I pried her arms apart, I saw her hand was still attached to her arm, if only by scraps of flesh and frayed tendons.
It got inside of me.
She wept.
I had to get it out.
Dr. Lopez wouldn't allow me to call the paramedics again. He put the little resort into lockdown. The archaeologist and paleontologist left despite his warnings, no doubt shaken by the recent death and mutilation. They would come back for the shark when the others arrived. I secured a tourniquet on Carmen's arm while Dr. Lopez removed the rest of her hand. We bandaged her, but she was catatonic. "Chase, we have to get her to a fucking hospital," I begged. "She needs a transfusion. She'll die."
We can't risk it,
he said. Dr. Lopez dropped the severed hand into a Tupperware container.
We don't know what the tide could do if it got out.
Got out? It's not some contagious disease.
We don't know what it is, Len.
Carmen never fully regained consciousness. Dr. Lopez took my phone when I was tending to her, leaving me unable to call for help even if I wanted to. I was terrified now, not just of the black tide, but of my supervisor. He was changing, paranoid, shifty. He spent nearly all day inside the fridge with the specimens. That night, I went out alone to the shore. I sat on the sand and watched the black tide sit motionless on the water, absorbing light so dark it seemed biblical. I stared into the abyss for an eternity, waiting for something to be revealed to me, some divine vision. Pinpricks of light, just like the ones I had seen several days ago when we took our first dive. They came into view slowly, blanketing the tide with the night sky once more. Each one's luminosity ebbed and flowed like heartbeats. It was the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. I was sitting on the edge of a planet, gazing out into infinite space.
Len!
Dr. Lopez had come for me. I think it was to prevent me from escaping, to call for help. But he unknowingly saved my life instead. I snapped out of my dreadful trance and got to my feet. The stars were gone, and it remained as I'd seen it before. No longer beautiful, but repulsive in its vastness. Those stars must have been what Gabriel saw before he walked into the void. We went back inside, and he admonished me.
Think of what happened to Gabriel,
He said.
Do you want that to be you?
There's something wrong with it.
I know there is.
Then we heard it. Thumping, rhythmic like a heartbeat, coming from the fridge. Dr. Lopez and I approached it cautiously, standing in front of the door. I realized that the thumping was coming from lower, down on the thick door, perhaps just a foot or so off the ground. What is that?
I don't know.
Too terrified to open the door, we retreated to our beds. But the thumping continued throughout the night. Hours and hours I couldn't sleep, waiting for the sun to rise and make everything seem less frightening. It was nearly 5 a.m. when Dr. Lopez rose and declared enough was enough.
We're scholars, goddammit, and we're acting like children.
Chase, wait, I pleaded. He was right. We were like two kids afraid of the closet. We were scientists, doctors. The black tide didn't have thoughts or feelings. Gabriel drowned, and Carmen was mentally ill. There was an explanation for everything if he looked hard enough. We stood outside the fridge's door again, listening to the thump, thump. I stood behind Dr. Lopez as he reached for the handle and opened the door. Gabriel, naked on his hands and knees, continued to thrust his head into the space where the door had been. The top of his skull was bloody from hours of impact. The realization hit me like a brick to the face. He's alive! Dr. Lopez didn't move.
He can't be.
One shark fell from a shelf and flopped helplessly on the floor. Another followed. Then all the fish began to move. The room full of dead things animated, and they were all alive once more despite being out of water for several days. Wet slapping filled the air. Even the hibiscus was alive, wriggling its way toward the open door. Gabriel remained on his hands and knees, but dragged himself forward, head hanging limp between his shoulders as if it were too heavy to lift. A trail of black water dripped from his slack jaw. Dr. Lopez slammed the door on him. "Chase!" I cried. I wept freely now, unable to cope with the sight of the alive dead. "We have to help him. Open the fucking door."
He isn't alive. None of these things are alive. It's impossible.
I reached for the handle, but Dr. Lopez shoved me away. I stumbled backward and lost my balance, landing hard on the floor. He loomed over me.
Don't you dare.
How can you just leave him in there?
We're going to call the main lab.
Dr. Lopez pulled his phone out and rang the number right there, standing with his back to the fridge. It rang, and rang, and rang. No one answered. He cursed.
What the hell? They're a 24-hour lab, damn it.
He tried again. 3 more times. 2 more. He gave me my cell phone, and I tried them too. The lab didn't answer. Suddenly I felt the weight of our isolation. Gabriel's thumping resumed inside the fridge. The black tide was retreating. Dr. Lopez and I stood alone on the shore, watching the darkness shrink away from us. It was moving, all of it, floating slowly out into the open ocean as one great mass. The smell of blood dissipated as it got further away from the beach. "Where is it going?" I asked. Dr. Lopez shook his head.
I don't know.
We could hear Gabriel and the fish slamming around inside the resort from where we stood. They were louder, more frantic. Gabriel even began to scream. A long, hoarse wailing that filled me with a sense of dread and nausea. It was a mournful cry, something you might hear at a funeral as the casket is lowered into the earth.
I think,
Dr. Lopez finally said,
that they want us to go with it.
As the black tide melted into the horizon, I saw the stars glimmer across it once more. Sensory overload. That's the best description I can come up with. The moment I stepped into David's basement, I was hit by a wall of static noise, flickering seizure-inducing flashes of gray and white, and a howling high-pitched wail. The only thing keeping me from slamming the door shut and legging it was the harrowing sight of David, a maniacal grin resting on his grotesquely raw-boned visage. I guess the shock of his sickening appearance paralyzed me long enough to remember the $5,000 he'd promised me. "Woods!" he yelled, jumping up and down bizarrely. "Get in here!" Stupefied by the surreal nature of it all, I found myself unable to move, let alone string together coherent thoughts. David kept spasming back and forth to the erratic flashes and discordant static buzz, half naked and quite obviously on something. When he noticed me, edging away nervously, a look of realization manifested on his face, and he quickly grabbed a remote, shutting down the madness. Sorry about that, he said, staring at me fixedly. It helps me focus. Focus? I asked, trying my best to avoid his incredibly unnerving gaze. Yeah, he said energetically. Look, I'll explain. Just come inside. The walls have ears. Eyes, too. And faces. But I'm more worried about the ears. I shuffled inside the dim basement room cautiously. He was, how do I put it, in a state. I hadn't seen him in a month or so, and I was taken aback by the extreme deterioration he'd undergone. It wasn't just that he was skinny, because he was, but it was like the bones underneath were protruding through the pale skin. Man, he said, lighting a cigarette. Do I have something for you? He slumped down in what I assumed was a chair, now camouflaged under a pile of assorted clothes, grinning widely. I quietly scanned the place for any illicit shit, but even if it had been right out in the open, I doubt I would have been able to spot it. The place was in a state of complete disarray, like he'd gone full-on berserk in there or something. Look, I swallowed deeply. I don't know what you've gotten yourself into, but I shouldn't even be here. He threw his head back and laughed. It's cool, man. Cool. I'm good, brother. Can't you see that? Better than ever. Fucking A-OK. And you can be too. He grabbed something from under the pile of clothes and held it up. It was a small cylindrical vial containing some vaguely blackish liquid and signaled for me to take it. I shook my head and took a step back. No fucking way. What is that shit? He started laughing again, but it gradually turned into uncontrollable coughing instead. I watched in horror as he more or less vomited up a disgusting glob of thick mucousy liquid, the slimy substance slowly dripping down to his chest. It's the signal, brother, he said, wiping remnants of the green-brown mucus from his mouth. It can't be explained, but it's all you'll ever need. I swear, man, it's like eating the flesh of an angel or something. Fucking out of this world. I don't know, man, I said, eyeing him with concern. You don't look so good. You sure you don't need help? Some people tell me that I need help, he sang, winking at me expectedly. Some people can fuck off and go to hell. I laughed. All right, I trust you. But this shit is all backwards, isn't it? What do you mean? He asked, shaking the vial erratically, the contents swirling hypnotically within. Well, I should be paying you, not the other way around. He threw me the vial. Consider it a drug trial or something. Very off the fucking books, though. Can't say shit to anyone. That's why it's gotta be you, Woods. I can't trust just anyone with this. These people don't fuck around. And the 5K? I asked, holding the vial up to my eye. Here, he said, handing me an envelope. Half now, half if you don't fucking die within a week. Die? I asked hesitantly. Fuck that shit, man. You telling me this isn't safe? I'm fucking with you. This shit will change you, though. Know that. They told me it'll open parts of your mind you didn't even know existed. You'll come out the other side like a brand new person. It's like sprouting a second brain or something. I let the vial rest between my thumb and index finger, eyes instinctively drawn to the lethargic figure of David. I wasn't seriously considering this, was I? $5,000 is a lot of money, granted, but it's not worth your life. It wasn't worth turning into whatever David had become. I swallowed deeply and felt doubt rising in my mind like bile up my throat. How long does it last? He just stared at me like I'd said something mind-bogglingly stupid. Forever. You ain't ever coming down from this trip. But that's a good thing, man. I've never felt better. Never felt better. That's the last thing I remembered him saying. He must have said something else. Some reassuring thing or other. Some explanation as to what was awaiting me on the other side. But I can't remember anything else. Just the vile feeling of the lukewarm liquid down my throat. Then the big black void of nothingness. I didn't feel much for the first couple of days. Just a mild headache, like the feeling of static in the back of my head. I don't know if you've ever thought about that. The static is a feeling. It's like a low hum, a persistent crackle, a buzzing ache. I guess it doesn't translate well. You'd know it, though. If you've been there. If you've felt it. If anything, I'd say I felt like I was having a death hangover. Like I'd died and returned somehow, suffering some afterlife withdrawal or something. Noise bothered me, light bothered me, taste bothered me, touch bothered me. Nothing felt right. Wherever I was, whatever I was doing, I felt like I didn't belong, that I was a stranger, a pariah, an alien life form, creeping paranoia and dread. The third day was a mess. I don't remember much from it, so I have to refer you to the journal. Yes, the journal. I forgot to tell you about that. It's the strangest thing. I suppose David must have given it to me. It wasn't mine, I'll tell you that much. Never seen it before. A black little thing, the tiny pencil hanging from it. I can't even remember opening it. But every page is filled with my handwriting, all right. Date unknown. State unknown. Day 3. Can't focus worth a shit. Everything flickering, just out of sight. Sounds not sounding right, like coming from nowhere inside my head. Fucking walls closing in on me. Gotta stay hidden from them. Things in my ears too. Hair on my eyes. Can't focus worth a shit. Thoughts are too loud. Not my own, I think. Did I just think that? I open my mouth to let them out, but they crawl around in there with teeth of flesh and skin. Not ready yet. See you soon. Can't focus worth of shit. Crazy shit, right? You haven't heard nothing yet, though. I remember day 4 and 5 only vaguely, like watching them unfold from outside of myself in flashes of episodic madness, all jumbled together to form some incoherent mess of a movie. But I feel them inexplicably, vividly, unfiltered, and pure. The world had different colors. I could smell them clear as day. Gray, formless, dull, lifeless people wandering around like they mattered. They didn't. In between the cracks of reality, you could see them spilling out. Piece by piece, organ by organ, body part by body part. A face in an eye, a fleshy, meaty iris staring back. I think I'd better refer you to the journal once more. Somehow, I make more sense there. Date obscure. State of hyper-imaginative. Day nonagon. Foregone are any hints of doubt and uncertainty. For now, I stare into the beyond and accept it as part of the very fabric of existence. I feel like weights have been lifted. I feel like Sisyphus free of the boulder, and I feel like the final puzzle piece that's been lost to me since birth has finally slid into its rightful place. In the beyond, there are agents, strange creatures of intelligence and raw brutality, violent shimmers that move between us and the void undetected. They know, that I see or sense. Thus, they beckon me to join them. I don't think I will. I don't think it's safe. But they watch me and listen. The walls have ears now, eyes too, and faces. But it's the ears that worry me. Written on the bottom of the page in crude, messy handwriting. I'm trying to find ways to cope, but I ain't fucking around with a gauge or a rope. I felt good. I felt great. I felt like I'd feasted on purity, eaten the flesh of an angel. Thoughts weren't just thoughts anymore. They manifested as constants of true or false, either as real or unreal. To see through the veil, man, I've never felt better. Yet, there were the issues with the side effects, the agents. As I got increasingly lost and infatuated in absorbing the beauty and complexity of everyday reality, the agents became ever more aware of me. Horrible beings they were, like from the collective nightmares of a 1950s lunatic asylum. You can't really describe them with human language. It's not so much that they're indescribable, but maybe too describable. I'll just cop out and show you the journal entry instead. Date null. State void. Day invalid. Flesh for bone, bone for flesh. The agents are in everything. Faces in their eyes, eyes in their faces, mouths lined with flesh, and flesh lined with mouths. I invited them in out of curiosity, out of neglect for human existence, out of a feeling of sweet self-destruction and delicious masochism. They breed in our filth, our waste, in our minds, and copulate within us in ways so sickening it defies explanation, gnawing at me with their skin teeth, flapping and squelching, hairy patches rubbing against hairy patches. I shouldn't have done it. It's what they want, isn't it? To let them in, to let them through. Who are they? Who made this thing? How do they get out? On day 6, I snapped out of it. Not instantly, but slowly, like a dream will fade throughout the day. I felt changed, like David said I would, but not in a good way. Not in a beautiful way. Not for the better, but in a grotesquely perverted way. As day 6 turned to day 7, I realized I hadn't eaten or slept since I consumed the signal. I spent 3 hours staring at myself in the mirror. I couldn't recognize myself. Not just because I was literally a pallid sack of skin and bones, a gaunt ghoul dressed in a skin suit staring back at me through bloodshot eyes, but also because it wasn't me. I swear that thing I'm wearing isn't me. The blue-black lips on my reflection didn't move, but I kept talking to myself in another man's voice. Peel it off now. Why don't you? I said without actually saying it. It has served its purpose. rotting from outside in. I answered without actually answering. The time is nigh. Who's there? I said. This time the cracked, lifeless lips moved. Who am I talking to? It interferes still, I said, lips remaining motionless. Not far away enough. Not yet. Right. I can't recall more of the conversation. I'm sure it went on for a while, but at some point I collapsed on the floor, convulsing in unimaginable pain. I remember the pain, though, vividly. It was like my insides tried to push their way to the outside, like my brain tried to squeeze its way out of my eye sockets, like my muscles were searching for a way out through every pore in my skin. I regained control briefly. Enough time to rush to my car, hazardously swerving past hazy vehicles, formless people, following an amorphous road laid out like pulsating cyst-ridden intestines before me. I felt nothing and everything at once. No pain, but unyielding torment. No heartbeat, but ceaseless machine gun throbs. Somehow I made it to David's place in one piece, crawling inside on limbs that were only vaguely mine anymore. I tumbled down the stairs to his basement, slithering the last few feet into his dusky room. David! I coughed. David! Are you here, brother? No answer, but the answer of nothing. My eyes were failing me. I could see behind me, then in front, then behind me again, like the flick of a switch. Behind me there was a wall, but the wall had ears and also faces and eyes. In front of me was David. Or what was left of him, anyway. He was spread out on the floor, and I mean that quite literally. He was face down, body split down the middle, dead center, and forced open like some corpse cocoon. Muscles and sinew and bones and organs split into halves. Gallons of blood encircling the macabre spectacle in an extremely satisfying ovaline puddle. I felt fear like I'd never felt it before. Present not only as an all-consuming sensation, but also in a very tangible shape and form. As I lay there sobbing and writhing in agony, I started talking to myself without actually moving my lips again. There has been a birthing, I said without saying it. We are one. Free. I'd been neglecting the obvious for far too long, but I realized in that moment what was happening. Not the full extent of it, of course, but the very basics. The fundamentals, so to speak. I stumbled to my feet, staggering over the remains of David, and into the bathroom. The light was on, flickering erratically, as was befitting the current ambience of unimaginable horror. And I stared at myself, which was definitely not myself in the mirror. I let my fingers trace the back of my head, feeling the protrusions and crevices, identifying them as I went along. Eyes, soft, bulgy, and round. Nose, a slimy cavity, nothing more. A mouth. Teeth like skin, skin like teeth. Lips quivering. Tongue like a long, limber leech. I turned my head slowly, watching in the mirror as the face on the back of my head came into sight. I talked to myself again, but this time I saw the lips moving. I wish I'd never seen those lips moving. It is nearing the end of the tuning, it said. It is almost at one with the signal. I don't know how many days I have left. I'm guessing maybe 1 or 2 before it claws its way out of my back. Whatever it is. I've considered my options. They aren't plentiful. Most of them involve me dying horribly in some way or another. Will it help, though? I keep asking myself. No, I don't think it will. I think I'm far into the beyond. A warning, then, is all I can leave behind. It's simple enough. Don't do it. Don't be tempted. Life imitates horror. Horror imitates life. The signal makes both happen simultaneously. And it's not pretty. In closing, I'll leave you with this excerpt from the last page of my journal. It seemed a fitting note to end things on. If you ever see me again, know that it's not me. I died in these pages somewhere, consumed by a parasite of my own choosing. Date, conundrum. State of. Day in between. Life happens. That's all life is. A series of happenings. You can't control it. It can't control you. You're both just passengers along for the ride. Who steers this vehicle then, you ask? Stupidly, I might add. In the end, it doesn't matter. In the end, it's just the end. You came into this life afraid, and you will leave it afraid. All that happens in between are just stages of fear, defined only by what frightens you. We are husks, hollow and empty, as proven by our choices, by our actions. We deserve the void, deserve to be replaced. Our time was now, but now is gone. A fleeting moment, uncared for and woefully neglected. What awaits is no better, no worse. It's nothing, just another nothing. The signal is aligning. Did you know that up until 1889, there was one extra country in Western Europe? I doubt it. After its great purge from our history, my library beneath Lyon holds the only records that ever existed, and trespassers there are shot on sight. The country's name was not recorded, only that it occupied land connecting Italy and the Iberian Peninsula, with colonies in Ethiopia and Liberia. Judging by the estimated death toll, its population at the time of its consumption was about 13 million. Guess it could have been worse. Certainly a small price to pay when bargaining with an entity that could have easily ended all life on Earth, unless a satisfactory compromise was met. We even offered it all of humanity's collective memories of the country and its inhabitants. It thought we were just sweetening the deal. It didn't realize we were really just getting it to pull off the biggest cover-up operation in history on our behalf. I shudder to imagine a fate like that. Everything you know and love devoured and utterly forgotten by the world. I wonder if people who knew someone from the place could still feel their absence, even if they couldn't remember them. That abstract, directionless sort of feeling of missing something that was never there. Like a gap in a jigsaw puzzle, with no piece to fill it. But what terrifies me most is the possibility it may have happened again. After all, just a few months ago, I woke up one morning and couldn't help but wonder why there was a ring on my finger. That's the kind of knowledge you just have to live with when you've retired from an organization like the one that once employed me. It's taken many forms throughout history, attaching itself to existing organizations like a parasite and siphoning off men and resources. But its current iteration is known as Interpol, Incident Response Team 6. It's called IRT-6 by those who are not in the know, and Deep 6 by those who are. And in their eyes, everything they do is justified by their motto, Quod nesse est fecimus. I've taken refuge somewhere outside even their jurisdiction, but I have no delusions that this will prevent them from tracking me down and euthanizing me like a dog for leaking their dirty laundry. But the world needs to know. And besides, what have I got left to lose? I have 1,000 stories I could tell, leaving me spoiled for choice. Yet, for some reason, there's this one job I haven't been able to get out of my head. I don't know why. It seems like a regular mission at the time, the equivalent to what you'd call an average lazy day at the office. It should have been utterly forgettable, but somehow, it still shows up in my dreams to this day. Back then, I went by the call sign Agent Blackbeard. I wasn't in a good place mentally when I was recruited. I hadn't shaved or combed my facial hair for a year, and comparing me to an old pirate captain was actually the generous option compared to calling me Agent Hobo, which would have been more apt. I've cleaned up a lot since then, and now sport nothing more than a 5 o'clock shadow, but the name stuck. On this particular job, I was being shadowed by a rookie. Her assigned nickname was Agent Etoll, a woman with round-rimmed glasses, a dark three-piece suit, and curly black hair all done up in a bun. Usually, the newbies grated on me, but I liked her. She was professional and deferential, and her bushy-tailed idealism reminded me of myself when I was green. "Equipment check-off," I declared, and she instantly set to work providing me with a full inventory of her gear, testing each to ensure its functionality. I was quite impressed by how fastidiously organized her setup was, far cleaner than my mess of a rucksack. Still, I didn't act impressed. In fact, my expression was downright disappointed. "Aren't you forgetting something, newbie?" I could see the exact moment her heart sank. Tell me, how do we keep our sidearms?" With shaky hands, she produced her pistol.
"Cocked and locked, sir."
"Wrong. It's cocked, locked, and stocked, rookie." I feigned exasperation. "Christ, don't tell me you've already forgotten one of the 3 basic rules." It was an absurd statement, but I said it with enough confidence, and it was just close enough to sensible that it sent her into a panic, digging through her bags in a frantic bid to figure out what the hell she'd missed.
I'm sorry, sir."
Her panic turned to confusion, though, when I couldn't help but crack up laughing. Head easy, Toll. I'm just yanking your chain." I gave her a clap on the back. "Some hazing is all. Your gear is perfect." She stared for a while.
"Oh, ha ha."
She gave a half-hearted attempt to fake a laugh. Note to self, not much of a sense of humor on this one, I'd thought. Our vehicle weaved through the back alleys of Paris, past herds of crackheads and ladies of the night, as if digging through multiple layers of sketchiness until finally reaching the rock bottom of the city, where no one dares to go. There, stained by piss and booze, was an unmarked concrete storage container, hiding a tunnel which led deep into the earth. Ever been through the catacombs before, Etoll?
"No, sir, but I've heard much about them."
Hope you ain't afraid of the dark. Or a few skeletons. Course, if you are, this job was probably never for you in the first place.
"I can handle it."
She couldn't hide the hint of nervousness in her voice, though.
If I may ask, why have we come here?
Our soothsayers have reported sensing some Category 8 angelic activity somewhere in northern Germany. We're here to meet a friend who will help us narrow down exactly where. Stay close, I explained. And sure enough, she was smart enough to stick an inch behind me like a lost puppy as I navigated those labyrinthian tombs. Just another reason I liked the newbie. The Paris catacombs are a world all of their own. Those public maps you've probably seen online, they only cover the first level, and even then, only half of it. We made sure of that. After all, we don't want any average Joe knowing that with a few turns, they can meet a three-headed eel who grants wishes, or a commune of cannibal mole people, or a poltergeist who claims to be the ghost of Margaret Thatcher. There's an entire supernatural ecosystem down there I could write novels explaining, but on this particular day, I didn't care about any of that. I made a beeline towards a single entity, an ancient goddess who was one of the greatest allies of Deep Six, as well as being one of the most putrid creatures I'd ever laid eyes upon. We referred to this entity as the Saint of Parasites, and it was exactly as pleasant as it sounds. It was about 10 meters tall, and sat upon a concrete pillar emerging up from what looked to be a bottomless pit. It looked like a woman, more or less, immobilized by her own mass. I'd call her morbidly obese, but perhaps it'd be more accurate to call her bloated, the way bodies can become lumpy and distended from pent-up gases over time. In fact, she overall looked and smelled like a corpse that had been left to rot and soak in the sewers for months. And through the pox-ridden, transparent skin of her belly, I could catch glimpses of intestinal worms the size of pythons, alongside the silhouettes of even stranger organisms. Beneath that was an array of basketball-sized oozing pustules which insect things suckled upon like teats. Ito lost her lunch right away. I couldn't blame her. In fact, I had brought along a bucket for that very purpose. Once she'd composed herself, I showed her how to properly bow in supplication. As we did so, I finally opened the kennel, allowing a heavily dosed sow to come waddling drunkenly out. We both cut our fingertips to mark the pig's forehead with our blood, and presented it to the goddess with a rehearsed chant. De furus vitae convivium to be a pharaoh, and tuam et fintitam, famine extequate. As we continued chanting, a tentacle-like appendage slunk lazily free from between the thing's lips, oozing slime as it searched for its meal. It's similar to a frog's tongue, I think, and the moment it touched the pig, it gripped it with that inescapably sticky goo and began reeling it in like a fisherman would. My ears rung from the pig's terrified squealing as it was pulled towards the foul thing's maw. I couldn't blame it, really. I can't imagine a more terrible fate. But in an instant it was gone, and the squeals went silent, replaced with the gentle humming of the she-beast. The cue our offering had been accepted. I stood and declared loudly, Obsecro versponsum rubrum nobis. There was a long pause, and then something else emerged from between the thing's lips. It was another woman, this one even taller and stick-thin with long black hair, sporting 4 arms and red body paint covering every inch of her skin not stained by foul effluence. Every part of her was far too long, from head and limbs to even mouth and eyes, as if you'd taken a picture of a human being and stretched it out vertically about 10 times. She slowly slid free from the goddess in a way that defied gravity, eventually suspending herself horizontally above the pit below, held by the sewer thing only by her feet. I stared into those eyes, each almost as tall as myself, and asked my question, Ube es spiritus sanctus, and she began to give her answer in an antediluvian form of sign language, transitioning robotically from one sign to the next. And just like that, the grim transaction was over. I thanked them both humbly for the information. The red woman slid back to from whence she came, and the goddess waved us off with an impatient glare. As we weaved back through the catacombs, I could tell Etol was still lost in a nauseous daze, her brain reeling from the sheer amount of what the fuckery she'd just witnessed. But she played it off like she wasn't even bothered. You know, you don't have to act tough, I noted. I mean, seeing what you just did for the first time, it can screw you up something fierce. If you want to talk about it, just say the word.
No, I'm fine, really.
She coughed, turning away from me.
You warned me about it all beforehand. You know, what this job would be like. You prepared me.
Nothing can prepare you for your first meeting with the Saint of Parasites. I'll be honest, when I was a newbie, first time I met her, I started weeping and puking so hard I screwed up the whole ritual. I gave her a pat on the back. You did pretty good, all things considered. I found that telling an embarrassing story was always a great way to break the tension when talking to newbies. And sure enough, she laughed and seemed to perk up.
Thank you, sir.
I gave her a wry smile before returning to business, checking the map on my phone. Anyway, our friend pointed us to a small club on the outskirts of Berlin by the name of Untot. That's where we'll find our angel. She whistled.
Wow, that's amazing, sir. How did you even know what she was saying?
I laughed. D6 agents like us get to learn a hell of a lot of languages. It's pretty much the one single perk of the job. And after all that, I made sure she got in a session with her D6 appointed therapist before our flight to Berlin a few weeks later. The first thing I noticed about Untot is that it was impossibly quiet for a New Year's night. The DJ was practically asleep, the dance floor a ghost town, and what few patrons there were dressed incredibly prudishly and had no interest in drink. The bartender looked bored to tears. She was a punkish young woman, complete with a pixie cut, black fishnets, an Arion t-shirt, and the thickest black lipstick and eyeshadow I'd ever seen. I politely asked her if she spoke English, and she nodded.
Evening.
She greeted, before her eyes drifted downwards.
What with the fanny pack?
I tucked my messenger bag behind me. It's not really any of your business, is it? I had a seat. Anyway, evening. The name's Jacob Henley. This here's Ida. I gestured to Etol. Both names had been made up on the spot, of course.
Oh, the mysterious type. I see.
She giggled.
Nice to meet you, Jacob. My name's Juna.
But of course I already knew that. I knew everything about her. Before I even walked into this building, I had extensive intel on every single staffer. Do you put any effort into guarding your privacy online? Most people don't. It's insane what IT can dig up with a modicum of effort. I knew she shared her first kiss during a picnic at Mauer Park and spent the whole rest of the day in a panic wondering whether she'd wasted it. I knew she volunteered at a soup kitchen during her weekends. I knew she ran a Tumblr blog dedicated to her homemade plushies. I knew she was beat as a kid. I knew she was 2 years clean from a heroin addiction. I knew she was in a virtual support group for chronic depression. And like the trained sociopath I was instinctually devising ways to use all that knowledge to manipulate her, if the need should arise. Nice to meet you too, Juna. I lied through my teeth. She smirked.
You too, Mr. Jacob, you said it was? It's been a while since we've had fats coming strolling through our door.
I didn't react in the slightest, but Etol went doe-eyed.
Don't look so surprised that I can tell. You two have got a certain gait about you. If you're here checking to see whether we have been selling spirits to toddlers and pushing E on the side, I assure you, you're wasting your time. Bossman keeps his place on the straight and narrow. But if you're here for a drink, well, I'm obliged to never turn away a customer. After all, I'm sure kicking people's doors down can get stressful.
I noticed the slight hint of venom in her tone. She was suspicious of cops. In this case, she was right to be. You don't know the half of it. But I'm not in much of a mood to drink. I just have a few questions for you. Her eyes narrowed.
I don't chit-chat with cops. If you're hoping I'll rat somebody out, you're barking up the wrong...
That much was obvious, and I know better than to waste my time. I cut in, raising a hand to silence her. Tell me, are you the spiritual type? She glared.
No, I can't say I am.
But you've met a lot of religious people lately, haven't you? That actually seemed to give her pause.
Religious?
Her eyes fluttered.
Yeah, I have actually.
I'd knocked her off her guard, and I knew it. You seem disturbed. What's bothering you? A nervous cloud fell over her, and she glanced around furtively, her voice lowering to a whisper as she leaned in.
I don't know. We've just been getting these folks all the time lately. It's like they are trying to turn this place into a Sunday school or something. The way they talk. It feels kind of...
She shivered.
It scared off a lot of our regulars. Boss went out to talk to them, get him to buzz off. But by the time he came back, somehow they had suckered him in too. You know, he's got a shrine built in his office now. A shrine! Can you believe that?
But she quickly caught herself and pulled back.
But I have said too much already.
I smiled and replied, You've said everything you needed to. Thanks for the help. Angels always liked to hide out in dens of sin like this, precisely because they knew it was the last place most people would think to look for them. But they couldn't help themselves but to leave their traces everywhere. This was the first nightclub I'd ever been in where I saw more rosaries than cleavage. I spoke to the DJ next, although it wasn't much of a conversation. He seemed to have an issue with me barging into his booth. Sir, I'm sorry, but you really can't be up in here. I lifted a flap of my coat, retrieving my suppressed MAC-10 from its shoulder sling on my side. Before he had the time to register it, the barrel was already pressed against his chest. You sure about that? I whispered. He went silent, but not an ounce of actual fear showed on his face. Only a sudden blankness. Still, I nodded to Etol to plug a USB stick into his setup and start messing with his controls. When I looked back, though, he was different. Changing. Flesh beginning to pop and bubble. Eyes and features drifting slowly out of place. His stare piercing my soul as protrusions of flesh began bulging out of his head and forming into shapes nature has never before saw fit to make. I didn't hesitate. All it took was one burst to turn his head into mangled ribbons of flesh. The thing about suppressors is, while they're not nearly as silent as in the movies, they're extremely good at making the sound of a gunshot less recognizable to untrained ears. There's a reason we scheduled this op to coincide with New Year's fireworks. Still, the patrons turned up their heads, startled and confused by the cracking of the sonic boom. It only took Etol another moment to finish her work, and the club's smooth jazz was replaced with a reading of Joshua Carducci's Ino e Satana, a 19th century poem designed specifically to whip angels and their flock into a frenzy. The results were as predictable as they were immediate. The thing seemed to be physically anguished by blasphemy, writhing and groaning like vampires in the sun. And as they moaned, they began to change, as if their flesh itself was beginning to strike out against the sound. It melted off them and reformed, like metal flowing into a molten fluid shape before solidifying into their true shapes. Have you ever seen crystals of bismuth? The way it forms out into those chaotic cubical geometric shapes, aligned with intricate patterns that almost look like fractals. Imagine something like that, but coated with a tight layer of flesh, eyes, mouths, and ears, and clumps of hair arranged randomly across its surface. Now you have a rough mental image of what every club patron's head had morphed into, and they all chanted and sang in some unnatural choir, over and over again. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of Hosts. The only human left was Juna, who had that telltale expression of a person whose entire perception of reality was crumbling all around them. I couldn't imagine what it was like for her. Even I, experienced as I was, felt a shiver go up my spine at the sight of the crowd, clenching my jaw to suppress the budding terror. The things all set to work procuring makeshift weapons wherever they could, blithely uncowed by the bullets whizzing through the club as we opened fire from the DJ booth. Each bullet seemed to shatter parts of them like broken glass, yet still they seemed to take 2 or 3 short bursts to take down. In seconds, they'd closed the distance and threatened to surround the station, forcing us to reposition, Etol clearing a path while I kept them off our flanks. What they lacked in weaponry, they made up for in doggedness, charging at us without fear or pain. I took to kneecapping them to slow their relentless advance. We took positions behind the bar, and by this point they were so close I had to grab one by the throat to keep it from striking me with a blade, smashing it against the bar and unloading 9 rounds into its chest. Eventually, Etol's weapon went silent, and I assumed she'd run dry. Before realizing that, like the bleeding heart she was, she'd gotten distracted comforting Juna, who was curled up in the fetal position, sobbing beneath the bar.
Oh God, oh God. What the hell is happening? Oh God. God, I don't want to die. Please don't let me die.
Etol had taken a knee and laid a hand on her shoulder.
We're going to get you out of here, okay? Just stay down and keep your...
Etol, eyes up! She glanced up just in time to see the thing lurching towards her with a knife. Her pistol was out in an instant, putting 6 rounds through its chest and 4 more through its skull once it was on the ground. The tide of battle began to turn as their numbers dwindled. Their lack of self-preservation became their weakness, as they practically marched themselves into our lines of fire with wild abandon. Soon they were having to stumble over the shattered bodies of their own compatriots just to make it to the bar. Me and Etol became perfectly synchronized, acting as one, covering each other's flanks and timing our reloads. And just as the battle seemed won, as if on cue, another figure came stumbling slowly from the manager's office. The boss man Juna had referred to earlier looked to be a short, portly man in what had once been a nice suit, where it was now stained with chunks of meat. It looked like something was tearing its way out of him from the inside. A massive gash almost bisected him, extending from his left shoulder down to his right lower belly, a few strings of tendon being the only thing holding him together. His skin was pale, eyes wide, blood dribbling from his lips. Holy is... He went up in a shower of viscera as the thing inside him broke free in a beam of shimmering divine light. The thing hovered in casual defiance of gravity and beamed in such a way that the eyes ached just to glance at it. Its outermost layer was composed of 3 concentric rings in constant rotation, each composed of human arms gripping each other's elbows, piercing golden eyes along every inch of skin. Upon a blanket of glittering white feathered wings in the center was a mass of flesh, constantly shifting between the heads of men, lions, eagles, and oxen, all united only in being hairless and furless, eyes and mouths wide as if silently screaming. We called these entities the Passover Angels. You've probably figured I don't scare easy, no matter how many living nightmares you've faced. The sight of an entity you can barely comprehend the sight of, a thing which so blatantly defies all of the natural laws upon which our psyches rely, will shake you to your core. I don't care if you're Billy Badass. This is a primal terror baked into our DNA, as if every single one of your ancestors comes screaming at you to run. Even with all my conditioning, I could feel my heart lodge itself in my throat and my vision blur. For a moment, I was a little boy again, quivering in terror at what waited wheezing on the other side of my closet door. And then one of its minions plunged a pocket knife in my side. I cried out, kicking its feet out from under it and dumping a mag into its chest once it was on the ground. Christ, get a hold of yourself, I thought as I limped frantically for cover. The world spinning around me, dizzy with vertigo as I felt as if teetering on the edge of a sheer cliff. Etol, to her credit, got her shit together even before I did, distracting the entity with a quartet of rounds. I soon joined her in the assault, not out of any belief that our bullets could harm the angel, but rather in hopes of distracting it until an opening presented itself. Tables and knives and chairs were tossed all about by some invisible force as it proceeded towards us, some debris dodged only by a matter of inches. It seemed to sense I was the point man and shifted its focus to me entirely. Every single one of its 1,000 eyes met mine, and suddenly I was swaddled in a blinding light. Then a sound came slamming into me like a tidal wave. I was the only one who could hear it. Yet, to me, it seemed powerful enough to knock me back like a shockwave, so deafening in its cacophony that even the gunshots had sounded like whispers by comparison. My ears rung with a million divine voices demanding me to end my own life in the name of all that is good and holy. My body began to move of its own accord, acting without my brain's input, slowly raising my gun to my chin. But Etol tackled me to the ground just in an instant before I was able to pull the trigger. It was ultimately Juno who saved us. Not through any intention, but rather through the string of blasphemies and profanity that naturally rolled off her tongue at the sight of the unfathomable horror looming over her. The thing seemed to wince, as if pained by her very words, and its countless eyes all turned to her. Before she even had time to regret her mistake, it was upon her. With telekinetic force alone, it restrained her against the ground with impossible strength as her screams reached a fever pitch, writhing and wailing as she fought against the inevitable. The thing's countless eyes rolled back into their sockets, and a drooling maw emerged from that formless mass of flesh in its center. Her screams turned to gasps as the angel began to steal something from her. It looked to be a foggy breath being sucked from her mouth into its. In reality, this breath was her very life force, her body withering as it was vacuumed out of her. In seconds, she was visibly drained, eyes sinking into their sockets, body becoming bony and emaciated. And all the while, I snuck up behind the thing and finally produced what my messenger bag had kept hidden. A scrawny, young lamb, kept in a chemically induced state of catatonia. In one smooth motion, I pulled my blade across its throat, and then wrung out its neck like a wet towel, showering the entity below in a chunky spray of red viscera. The blood of the innocent sizzled against the entity's flesh as if it had been poured into a hot grill. Its shriek sounded like the crack of thunder, shaking the building to its foundations, glasses falling from shelves and shattering against the floor. Its form began to bubble and melt, tears oozing from its many eyes, its ring spinning frantically as it tried to turn and flee. But my gun was already braced upon my shoulder again, and this time each shot tore through the weakened beast with a splatter of golden ichor. It was always bittersweet to witness the end of something so ancient. Sometimes I wonder how many millennia the immortal being had wandered this earth, only to finally die at our feet as its form crumpled beneath 2 volleys of 9mm parabellum rounds. You know, it's funny. Ask anybody in Deep Six, and they'd all take it for granted that angels were simply pure evil. Looking back, I don't know how it never occurred to me that it might just have been fighting back after we'd driven much of their kind to extinction. But I wasn't so interested in such moral quandaries back then. I was distracted by a more pressing horror. Etol was resuscitating Juna. I knew I should have said something, that I should have stopped her, told her to leave the bartender to die. But for reasons I'll never understand, the words just caught in my throat. Maybe it was due to the sheer passion with which Etol performed her work, tears welling in her eyes as she frantically performed chest compressions on the gaunt and unconscious woman. I couldn't bring myself to stop her. I only prayed to myself that Juna would just pass on, to save me from having to make that call. But instead, she suddenly sucked in a breath. Etol beamed with relief as Juna coughed and sputtered, life returning to her weakened body. She was shell-shocked but cognizant. It took a few good minutes and a few swigs of water before she even had the energy to sit up. Once she could speak, though, she had nothing but gratitude.
Oh God, thank you. Thank you so much. I was so scared. I thought I was going to die. What happened to... I can't.
Etol hushed her frantic gibberish with a finger to her lips.
Shh. You're still disoriented. We need to get you someplace safe quickly.
Exhausted beyond measure, both physically and mentally, all Juna could do was lean forward and wrap Etol in a hug.
Thank you.
She whispered.
You saved my life.
I could see Etol's eyes growing foggy, even wiping a tear from her cheek. Hell, I almost felt a tear coming on myself. Almost. The local police didn't even spare us a glance as they stormed the building. After all, we had jurisdiction over pretty much every country on Earth, besides the big NK. World governments were content to pinch their noses at our methods as long as we got results. For the same reason you'd hire an exterminator to flood your home with toxic gas for you. Odious as it was, at least it beat having to deal with your pest problem, all on your own. The cleanup crews set to work making sure these events would never see the light of day. As far as the public records were concerned, Untot will have never even existed. We helped Juna weakly wobble her way to the truck, and me and Etol shared a moment.
You know, sir, to be honest, I've been having some doubts about all this. You know, the job,
she said.
But this was exactly what I dreamed of when I joined up with you all. A chance to really make a difference. You know, to actually, truly help people. Something I could never really do at that desk job. So, I want to thank you.
I know I should have dispelled that silly notion, reminded her that we serve a higher priority, and that helping people had never been a part of our job description. But I just couldn't bring myself to wipe that smile off her face. Maybe that had been the first clue I was going soft. I rested a hand on her shoulder, the closest thing I'd ever managed to a hug. And for the first time, she genuinely smiled at me. I'm glad. And I'll take good care of Juna. So don't you worry about her, okay? In a sense, I wasn't lying. My conversation over the phone with my handler the next morning, however, was much less pleasant. I was all too familiar with the sound of the thick drawl of the American South oozing through the phone.
"Well, howdy, Black. Congrats on the op,"
he said.
"Heard they pulled at least 24 bodies from that place. Christ, that angel bastard was in deep. But you never let us down."
"Actually, Barber, there is one loose end,"
"Oh,"
he groaned.
"Wonderful. Just what I'd like to hear."
His voice dripped with sarcasm. "It's nothing, really. One of the Angel's code greens made it out of the building. She only took it for a few seconds, so the transformation won't have any effects on her mentally, but it will be visible. In 48 hours, she'll be..."
"Like walking a goddamn billboard writing supernatural,"
he cut in.
"Would you mind telling me how in the hell she made it out of there alive?"
"Agent Etol rescued her, sir. Hell, but brought her back from the brink of death." There was a long pause, and then a scoff, as if he couldn't believe a word he was hearing.
"Well, why in the hell would she go and do a thing like that?"
I sighed, taking a deep breath. I really didn't want to have this conversation right now. "Look, I've got the code green right here. I'll just take care of her myself."
"Forget that. Etol's a big girl. You tell her to go clean up her own goddamn mess."
"She's not ready, Barber," I asserted. "Not yet. Soon." He fell begrudgingly silent at that. He knew what I meant. We always worked rookies in slow, like the old parable of the frog in the boiling pot. We pulled back the curtain gradually, inch by inch, so they didn't realize how deeply they're being lured into the mire. We study them, form a psychological profile, and determine exactly how to gaslight them, manipulate them, exploit their fears and insecurities, how to break them until they're utterly under our control. And by the time they truly realize what they've signed up for, it's already too late.
"We are going to have a long conversation about this during your debriefing, Black,"
he concluded bitterly.
"Get it done."
Before I could respond, he hung up the phone. I'd taken Juna back to her apartment, let her huddle up on the couch, all wrapped up in a thick blanket. She didn't seem to question why I was dressed in a surgical PPE. She didn't have the mental faculties for it, I figured. She was barely recognizable after what she'd gone through, shivering like a beaten dog, and emaciated enough to look anorexic.
I still don't understand what I saw. I never thought anything like that could exist. Those things. Were they even people?
I gave her a pat on the back. "Just calm down and relax. Everything will be explained over time, once you're well. You're going to be placed under the agency's protection program, which will take over your treatment and ensure nothing unnatural is ever able to find you again." I paused. "You look fatigued. Would you like me to make you some coffee? Tea?" She nodded.
Just water.
She flashed me a weak smile as I made for the kitchen.
Thank you so much for all of this, really.
My stomach twisted into a knot at her words. "Please, don't thank me." I prepared her a cool glass of water, just as she requested, but included an extra ingredient. People call it siren's blood, but that's just a nickname. Its actual components are far worse. It grew a bright pink as it mixed into the glass, but all it took was some light stirring to render it downright invisible. She didn't seem to notice anything off when she took her first sip, but then she was struck with a sudden lightheadedness, the glass falling from her hand. "How are you feeling? Better?" I asked.
I'm feeling... I feel...
She fell silent, her eyes losing focus as if gazing out at something a million miles in the distance. I had seen it a million times before. The way all thoughts, all inhibitions leave the mind of whoever consumes the stuff. Still, it never stopped sending shivers up my spine. I tested it. Raise both hands in front of your face. She did, without a second thought. Lower them. Again, she did, like a robot obeying its programming. By now, her blank eyes were glowing a vibrant pink, drool dribbling down her chin. I pushed up a table and slid her a typed document and a blank piece of notebook paper, side by side. Please copy the contents of the document onto this piece of paper in your own handwriting. I don't remember exactly what it said. Some bullshit I wrote about how she'd relapsed and all the therapy was doing nothing for her depression, ending with those 3 words, "I'm so sorry." At the time, I never thought about how painful the letter would be to actually read. To wonder why you didn't see the warning signs, whether you could have done more, whether you could have stopped it. I'd written the words that would devastate an entire family with the exact same aloof detachment you would feel while filling out paperwork. Once she was finished writing, I carefully slid her note away from her, and then, with gloved hands, I laid a .32 revolver on the table. "Pick up the revolver." She did so. "Place the barrel against the back of your throat." She did. "Now, pull the trigger." I wish I could tell you I was racked by guilt as I watched her splatter her own brains against the wall. But you want to know the truth? I didn't feel a goddamn thing. Once you've mired yourself neck deep in evil, convinced yourself it's just a means to an end, the shit you'd have once found unforgivable became routine. After all, after making over 100 sacrifices in the name of the greater good, what's one more body on the pile? But now, at the end of it all, every time I close my eyes, I see their faces. I know no one will believe this. I know they'll send a squad to kill me for posting this. I know I'll deserve it. Still won't make it easy for them. If you leave with one takeaway, let it be this. You know those old rumors about men in black suits skulking around UFO crash sites and cursed arcade cabinets or whatever, and disappearing the witnesses? Those kitschy conspiracy theories you laughed at and dismissed out of hand? I want you to know that they're all too real. And if you want any chance of surviving an encounter with them alive, you have to remember, no matter what they try to tell you, they're not the good guys, and they're not your friends. They're zealots, a death cult single-mindedly devoted to the status quo. And they'll happily kill you and everyone you love to make sure it persists. And behind the curtain, they've been working to bend every government, every police force, every national power you know and trust to become mired in that evil, complicit in their madness, to run our society the way these monsters that call themselves men see fit. And they're winning. Quod nexesse is facimus. Over my shoulder, whooping and hollering excitedly as I delivered kick after kick to the locked door handle. The inebriated ruckus stopped the moment the wood around the lock splintered. The door swung inwards. A bony face leered down at me. I screamed, stumbling backward and falling flat on my ass. The other three were howling with laughter. I looked up, angry wrong. Was the building the mad dancers were making their sacrifice in front of? It was our hotel. Our many times since refurbished but still very much rustic and true to the town's roots hotel. The painting didn't have a title or frame. It hung on a rusted nail and dirty string from the cinder block walls. After a few minutes, one of us shuddered and suggested we moved on. Unfortunately, the rest of the exhibits only gave the growing tightness in my chest further cause to take hold. The lump in my throat grew heavier with each illuminated exhibit. The spaces between breaths shorter and shorter with every new oddity the museum management kept hidden down here, away from minds too weak to comprehend them. There were taxidermied creatures, none amongst us recognized, stuffed things with forms completely unfamiliar, a menagerie of twisted beings with no tangible adherence to the laws of nature or biology. There was a school of 6 dried fish, each sporting 3 pairs of inch-long human arms, hung on wire from a thin pipe scaffold. There was what I can only describe as an orangutan with matted dark fur, no head, and a large mouth where its belly should be, locked forever in a duel with a rhino-sized frog on a large wooden plinth. Most shocking of all was the large, dried-out husk of a bus-sized maggot with the face of a colossal human baby, hanging from the ceiling by thick cable screwed into somewhere unseen on its back. We found dioramas and paintings of horrific acts and incidents, the details so clear they could have been recreated from a memory. There were shelves of dusty books, volumes bound in I don't want to know what. Books with titles like, "Ha ha 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 ha, The Children Are Bleeding, A Housewife's Tale," and The Sanctity of Silence. Scattered amongst the paintings, shelves, and grotesque anatomies were glass cases containing tools and implements whose designs seemed far too intricate and advanced to carry the level of rust and corrosion they did. Despite the fresh wave of dread that came with every new monstrosity, we pressed on, trying and failing to convince both each other and ourselves that none of them were real. It's just some leftover stuff from some stupid art project. Look, you can see on that one, it's obviously made of rubber, right? Whoever made this stuff was a real twisted guy. Probably some sick kind of basement dweller. These comments and many more did nothing to stem the rising panic and what forced, nervous laughs remained. We'd been stupidly traumatizing ourselves in the crushing darkness for a half hour,